through the rest of the cemetery to Bill's house. I put the CD, complete with its little sticky note, on top of the pile from which I'd taken it, and I skedaddled. I second-guessed myself, and third, fourth, and fifth guessed, too. At Merlotte's, I worked in a kind of haze, concentrating fiercely on getting lunch orders right, being quick, and responding instantly to any request. My other sense told me that despite my efficiency, people weren't glad to see me coming, and I really couldn't blame them. Tips were low. People were ready to forgive inefficiency as long as you smiled while you were sloppy. They didn't like the unsmiling, quick-handed me. I could tell, simply because he thought it so often, that Sam was assuming I'd had a fight with Eric. Holly thought I was having my period. And Antoine was an informant. Our cook had been lost in his own broody mood. I realized how resistant he normally was to my telepathy, only when he forgot to be. I was waiting on an order to be up at the hatch, and I was looking at Antoine while he flipped a burger, and I heard directly from him, "Not getting off work to meet that asshole again. He can just stuff it up his butt. I'm not telling him nothing else." Then Antoine, who I'd come to respect and admire, flipped the burger onto its waiting bun and turned to the hatch with a plate in his hand. He met my eyes squarely. "Oh, shit," he thought. "Let me talk to you before you do anything," he said, and I knew for sure that he was a traitor. "No," I said, and turned away, going right to Sam, who was behind the bar washing glasses. "Antoine is some kind of agent for the government," I said, very quietly. Sam didn't ask me how I knew, and he didn't question my statement. His mouth pressed into a hard line. "We'll talk to him later," he said. "Thanks, sir." I regretted now that I hadn't told Sam about the ware buried on my land. I was always sorry when I didn't tell Sam something, it seemed. I got the plate and took it to the right table without meeting Antoine's eyes. Some days I hated my ability more than others. Today was one of those days. I'd been much happier, though in retrospect it had been a foolish happiness, when I'd assumed Antoine was a new friend. I wondered if any of the stories he told about going through Katrina and the Superdome had been true, or if those had been lies too. I'd felt such sympathy for him, and I'd never had a hint until now that his persona was false. How could that be? First, I don't monitor every single thought of every person. I block a lot of it out in general, and I try especially hard to stay out of the heads of my coworkers. Second, people don't always think about critical stuff in explicit terms. A guy might not think, "I believe I'll get the pistol from under the seat of my truck and shoot Jerry in the head for screwing my wife." I was much more likely to get an impression of sullen anger with overtones of violence, or even a projection of how it might feel to shoot Jerry. But the shooting of Jerry might not have reached the specific planning stage at the moment the shooter was in the bar when I was privy to his thoughts. And mostly people didn't act on their violent impulses, something I didn't learn until after some very painful incidents as I grew up. If I spent my life trying to figure out the background of every single thought I heard, I wouldn't have my own life. At least I had something to think about besides wondering what the hell was happening with Eric and the Longtooth pack. At the end of my shift, I found myself in Sam's office with Sam and Antoine. Sam shut the door behind me. He was furious. I didn't blame him. Antoine was mad at himself, mad at me, and defensive with Sam. The atmosphere in the room was choking with anger and frustration and fear. "Listen, man," Antoine said. He was standing facing Sam. He made Sam look small. "Just listen, okay? After Katrina, I didn't have no place to live and nothing to do. I was trying to find work and keep myself going. I couldn't even get a damn FEMA trailer. Things were going bad. So I borrowed a car to get to Texas to some relatives. I was gonna dump it where the cops could find it, get it back to the owner. I know it was stupid. I know I shouldn't have done it, but I was desperate, and I did something dumb." "Yet you're not in jail," Sam observed. His words were like a whip that barely flicked Antoine, drew a little bit of blood. Antoine breathed out heavily. "No, I'm not. And I'll tell you why. My uncle is a werewolf,
in one of the New Orleans packs, so I knew something about him. An FBI agent named Sarah Weiss came to talk to me in jail. She was okay. But after she spoke with me once, she brought this guy Latesta, Tom Latesta. He said he was based in Rhodes, and I couldn't figure out what he was doing in New Orleans. But he told me that he knew all about my uncle, and he figured that you all were coming out sooner or later, since the vamps did. He knew what you were, that there were other things besides wolves. He knew there'd be a lot of people who didn't like hearing the people who were part animal lived in with the rest of us. He described Sookie to me. He said she was something strange too, and he didn't know what. He sent me here to watch, to see what happened.
Sam and I exchanged glances. I don't know what Sam had anticipated, but this was way more serious than I'd imagined. I figured back. Tom Latesta has known all along? I said. When did he start thinking there was something wrong with me? Had it been before he saw the footage from the hotel explosion in Rhodes, which he'd used as the reason for approaching me a few months ago?
Half the time he's sure you're a fraud. Half the time he thinks you're the real deal.
I turned to my boss. Sam, he came to my house the other day, Latesta. He told me that someone close to me, one of the great relatives, I didn't want to get more specific in front of Antoine, had fixed it so he had to back off.
That explains why I was so mad,
Antoine said, and his face hardened.
That explains a lot.
What did he tell you to do? Sam asked.
Latesta said the car theft thing was forgotten as long as I kept an eye on Sam and any other people who weren't all the way human who came into the bar. He said he couldn't touch Sookie now, and he was mighty pissed.
Sam looked at me, a question on his face. He's sincere, I said.
Thank you, Sookie,
Antoine said. He looked abjectly miserable. Okay, Sam said, after looking at Antoine for a few more seconds.
You still have a job? No conditions?
Antoine was looking at Sam unbelievingly.
He expects me to keep watching you. Not a condition, but a warning. If you tell him one thing more besides the fact that I'm here and running this business, you're out of here. And if I can think of something else to do to you, I will.
Antoine seemed weak with relief.
I'll do my best for you, Sam,
he said.
Tell the truth, I'm glad it all came out. It's been sitting heavy on my conscience.
There'll be a backlash, I said when Sam and I were alone.
I know. Latesta will come down on him hard, and Antoine will be tempted to make something up to tell him.
I think Antoine is a good guy. I hope I'm not wrong. I've been wrong about people before, in major ways.
Yeah, I hope he lives up to our expectations.
Sam smiled at me suddenly. He had a great smile, and I couldn't help but smile back.
It's good to have faith in people sometimes. Give them another chance, and we'll both keep our eyes on them.
I nodded. Okay, well, I better get home. I wanted to check my cell phone for messages, and my landline too, and my computer. I was dying for someone to reach out and touch me.
Is something the matter?
Sam asked. He reached out to give me a tentative pat on the shoulder.
Anything I can do?
You're the greatest, I said, but I'm just trying to get through a bad situation.
Eric's out of touch,
he said, proving that Sam is one shrewd guesser. Yeah, I admitted, and he's got relatives in town. I don't know what the hell's going on. The word relatives jogged my brain. How are things going in your family, Sam?
The divorce is no fault, and it's going through, he said. My mom is pretty miserable, but she'll be better as time goes on, I hope. Some of the people in Riot are giving her the cold shoulder. She let Mindy and Craig watch her change.
What form did she pick? I'd rather be a shapeshifter than a were-animal, so I'd have a choice.
Scotty, I think. My sister took it real well. Mindy's always been more flexible than Craig.
I thought women were almost always more flexible than men, but I didn't think I needed to say that out loud. Generalizations like that can come back to bite you in the ass. Deidre's family settled down?
Looks like the wedding's back on, as of 2 nights ago, Sam said. her mom and dad finally got that the contamination couldn't spread to Deidre and Craig and their kids, if they have any.
So you think the wedding will take place?
Yeah, I do. You still going to write with me?
I started to say, you still want me to? But that would have been unduly coy, since he just asked me. When the date is set, you'll have to ask my boss if I can get off work, I told him. Sam, it may be tacky of me to persist in asking, but why aren't you taking Janelin? I wasn't imagining the discomfort that emanated from Sam. I can just tell that she and my mom wouldn't get along. If I do introduce her to my family, I think I better wait until the tension of the wedding isn't part of the picture. My mom's still jangled from the shooting and the divorce, and Janelin is not a calm person. In my opinion, if you were dating someone you were clearly embarrassed to introduce to your family, you were probably dating the wrong person. But Sam hadn't asked me for my opinion. No, she certainly isn't a calm individual, I said. And now that she's got those new responsibilities, she's got to be pretty focused on the pack, I guess.
What? What new responsibilities?
Uh-oh. I'm sure she'll tell you all about it, I said. I guess you haven't seen her in a couple of days, huh?
Nope. So we're both down in the dumps,
he said. I was willing to concede I'd been pretty grim, and I smiled at him. Yeah, that's a big part of it, I said. With Eric's maker being in town and him being scarier than Freddy Krueger, I'm pretty much on my own, I guess.
If we don't hear from our significant others, let's go out tomorrow night. We can hit Crawdad Diner again, Sam said, or I can grill us some steaks.
Sounds good, I told him, and I appreciated his offer. I'd been feeling kind of cast adrift. Jason was apparently busy with Michelle, and after all, he'd stayed the other night when I'd half expected him to scoot out of the house. Eric was busy, apparently. Claude was almost never at the house and awake when I was awake. Tara was busy being pregnant, and Amelia had time to send me only the occasional email. Though I didn't mind being by myself from time to time. In fact, I enjoyed it. I'd had a little too much of it lately, and being alone is a lot more fun if it's optional. Relieved that the conversation with Antoine was over, and wondering what trouble Tom Latesta might cause in the future, I grabbed my purse from the drawer in Sam's desk and headed for home. It was a beautiful late afternoon when I pulled up in back of the house. I thought of working out to an exercise DVD before I fixed supper. Claude's car was gone. I hadn't noticed Jason's truck, so I was surprised to see him sitting on my back steps. Hey, brother, I called as I got out of the car. Listen, let me ask you... And then, getting his mental signature, I realized the man sitting on the steps wasn't Jason. I froze. All I could do was stare at my half-fake great-uncle Dermot and wonder if he had come to kill me. Chapter 11. He could have slain me about 60 times in the seconds I stood there. Despite the fact that he didn't, I still didn't want to take my eyes off him.
Don't be afraid,
Dermot said, rising with grace that Jason could never have matched. He moved like his joints were machine-made and well-oiled. I said through numb lips, "Can't help it."
I want to explain,
he said as he drew nearer. Explain?
I wanted to get closer to both of you,
he said. He was well into my personal space by then. His eyes were blue like Jason's, candid like Jason's, and really, seriously crazy, not like Jason's.
I was confused.
About what? I wanted to keep the conversation going. I surely did, because I didn't know what would happen when it came to a halt.
About where my loyalties lay,
he said, bowing his head as gracefully as a swan. Sure, tell me about that. Oh, if only I had my squirt gun loaded with lemon juice in my purse. But I'd promised Eric I'd put it on my nightstand when Claude had come to live with me, so that was where it lay. And the iron trowel was where it was supposed to be, in the tool shed.
I will,
he said, standing close enough that I could smell him. he smelled great. Fairies always do.
I know you met my father, Niall.
I nodded, a very small movement. Yes, I said to make sure.
Did you love him?
Yes, I said without hesitation. I did. I do.
He's easy to love. He's charming, Dermot said. My mother, Einan, was beautiful too. Not a fairy kind of beautiful like Niall, but she was human beautiful.
That's what Niall told me, I said. I was picking my way through a conversational minefield.
Did he tell you the water fairies murdered my twin?
Did Niall tell me your brother was murdered? No, but I heard.
I saw parts of Finton's body. Neve and Lachlan had torn him limb from limb.
They helped drown my parents, too, I said, holding my breath. What would he say? He struggled to speak, his face desperate.
But I wasn't there. Niall.
It was terrible to watch Dermot struggle to speak. I shouldn't have had any mercy for him, since Niall had told me about Dermot's part in my parents' deaths, but I really couldn't endure his pain. So, how come you ended up siding with Brendon's forces in the war?
He told me my father had killed my brother, Dermot said bleakly, and I believed him. I mistrusted my love for Niall. When I remembered my mother's misery after Niall stopped coming to visit her, I thought Brendon must be right and we weren't meant to mingle with humans. It never seems to turn out well for them, and I hated what I was, half human. I was never at home anywhere.
So, are you feeling better now? About being a little bit human?
I've come to terms with it. I know my former actions were wrong, and I'm grieved that my father won't let me into fairy.
The big blue eyes looked sad. I was too busy trying not to shake to get the full impact. In a breath, out of breath. Calm, calm. So now you're thinking Jason and I are okay? You don't want to hurt us anymore? He put his arms around me. This was hug Sookie season, and no one had told me ahead of time. Fairies were very touchy-feely, and personal space didn't mean anything to them. I would have liked to tell my great-uncle to back off, but I didn't dare. I didn't need to read Dermot's mind to understand that almost anything could set him off, so delicate was his mental balance. I had to stiffen all my resolution to maintain my even breathing so I wouldn't shiver and shake. His nearness and the tension of being in his presence, the huge strength that hummed through his arms, took me back to a dark, ruined shack and two psycho fairies who really had deserved their deaths. My shoulders jerked, and I saw a flash of panic in Dermot's eyes. Calm, be calm. I smiled at him. I have a pretty smile, people tell me, though I know it's a little too bright, a little nuts. However, that suited the conversation perfectly. The last time you saw Jason, I said, and then I couldn't think how to finish.
I attacked his companion, the beast who'd hurt Jason's wife.
I swallowed hard and smiled some more. Probably would have been better if you'd explained to Jason why you were going after Mel, and it wasn't Mel who killed her, you know?
No, it was my own kind that finished her off, but she would have died anyway. He wasn't taking her to get help, you know.
Wasn't much I could say, because his account of what had happened to Crystal was accurate. I noticed I hadn't gotten a coherent response from Dermot on why he'd left Jason in ignorance of Mel's crime. But you didn't explain to Jason, I said, breathing in and out in a very soothing way, I hoped. It seemed to me that the longer I touched Dermot, the calmer we both got, and Dermot was markedly more coherent.
I was very conflicted,
he said seriously, unexpectedly borrowing from modern jargon. Maybe that was as good an answer as I was going to get. I decided to take another tack. "Did you want to see Claude?" I said hopefully. "He's living with me now, just temporarily. He should be back later tonight."
I'm not the only one, you know,
Dermot told me. I looked up and met his mad eyes. I understood that my great-uncle was trying to tell me something. I wished to God I could make him rational, just for 5 minutes. I stepped back from him and tried to figure out what he needed. "You're not the only fairy left out in the human world. I know Claude's here. Someone else is too?" I would have enjoyed my telepathy for a couple of minutes. "Yes. Yes." His eyes were pleading with me to understand. I'd risk a direct question. "Who else is on this side of Fairy?" "You don't want to meet him," Dermot assured me. "You have to be careful. He can't decide right now. He's ambivalent." Right. Whoever he wasn't the only one who had mixed feelings. I wished I knew the right nutcracker that would open up Dermot's head. "Sometimes he's in your woods." Dermot put his hands on my shoulders and squeezed gently. It was like he was trying to transmit things he couldn't say directly into my flesh. "I heard about that," I said sourly. "Don't trust other fairies," Dermot told me. I shouldn't have. I felt like a light bulb had popped on above my head. "Dermot, have you had magic put on you? Like a spell?" The relief in his eyes was almost palpable. He nodded frantically. "Unless they're at war, fairies don't like to kill other fairies, except for Neve and Lachlan. They liked to kill everything, but I'm not dead, so there's hope." Fairies might be reluctant to kill their own kind. They didn't mind making them insane, apparently. "Is there anything I can do to reverse this spell? Can Claude help?" "Claude has little magic, I think," Dermot said. "He's been living like a human too long. My dearest niece, I love you. How is your brother?" We were back in Nutty Land. God bless poor Dermot. I hugged him, following an impulse. "My brother is happy, Uncle Dermot. He's dating a woman who suits him, and she won't take any shit off him either. Her name is Michelle, like my mom's, but with 1 L instead of 2. Dermot smiled down at me. Hard to say how much of this he was absorbing. "Dead things love you," Dermot told me, and I made myself keep smiling. "Eric the vampire? He says he does." "Other dead things, too. They're pulling on you." That was a not-so-welcome revelation. Dermot was right. I'd been feeling Eric through our bond as usual, but there were 2 other gray presences with me every moment after dark. Alexei and Appius Livius. It was a drain on me, and I hadn't realized it until this moment. "Tonight," Dermot said, "you'll receive visitors." So now he was a prophet? Good ones? He shrugged. "That's a matter of taste and expedience." "Hey, Uncle Dermot, do you walk around this land very often?" "Too scared of the other one, but I try to watch you a little." I was figuring out if that was a good thing or a bad thing when he vanished. Poof! I saw a kind of blur, and then nothing. His hands were on my shoulders, and then they weren't. I assumed the tension of conversing with another person had gotten to Dermot. Boy, that had been really, really weird. I glanced around me, thinking I might see some other trace of his passage. He might even decide to return. But nothing happened. There wasn't a sound except the prosaic growl of my stomach, reminding me that I hadn't eaten lunch and that it was now supper time. I went into the house on shaking legs and collapsed at the table. Conversation with a spy, interview with an insane fairy. Oh yes, phone Jason and tell him to be back on fairy watch. That was something I could do sitting down. After that conversation, I remembered to carry in the newspapers when I got my legs to working again. While I baked a Marie Callender's pot pie, I read the past 2 days' papers. Unfortunately, there was a lot of interest on the front page. There had been a gruesome murder in Shreveport, probably gang-related. The victim had been a young black man wearing gang colors, which was like a blinking arrow to the police, but he hadn't been shot. He'd been stabbed multiple times, and then his throat had been slashed. Yuck. Sounded more personal than a gang killing to me. Then the next night, the same thing had happened again, this time to a kid of 19 who wore different gang colors. He died the same awful way. I shook my head over the stupidity of young men dying over what I considered nothing, and moved on to a story that I found electrifying and very worrisome. The tension over the werewolf registration issue was rising. According to the newspapers, the wares were the big controversy. The stories hardly mentioned the other two natured, yet I knew at least one werefox, one werebat, two were-tigers, a score of were-panthers, and a shapeshifter. Werewolves, the most numerous of the two natured, were catching the brunt of the backlash, and they were sounding off about it, as they should have.
Why should I register? As if I were an illegal alien or a dead citizen.
Scott Wacker, an Army general, was quoted as saying,
"My family has been American for 6 generations. All of us Army people. My daughter's in Iraq. What more do you want?"
The governor of one of the northwestern states said,
"We need to know who's a werewolf and who's not. In the event of an accident, officers need to know to avoid blood contamination and to aid in identification."
I plunged my spoon into the crust to release some of the heat from the pot pie. I thought that over. Bullshit, I concluded.
"That's bourgeois,"
General Wacker responded in the next paragraph. So Wacker and I had something in common.
"For one thing, we change back to human form when we're dead. Officers already glove up when they're handling bodies. Identification is not going to be any more of a problem than with the one-natured. Why should it be?"
You go, Wacker. According to the newspaper, the debate raged from the people in the streets, including some who weren't simply people, to members of Congress, from military personnel to firefighters, from law experts to constitutional scholars. Instead of thinking globally or nationally, I tried to evaluate the crowd at Merlot's since the announcement. Had revenue fallen off? Yes, there'd been a slight decrease at first, right after the bar patrons had watched Sam change into a dog and Trey become a wolf, but then people had started drinking as much as they had formerly. So was this a created crisis? A nothing issue? Not as much as I would have liked, I decided, having read a few more articles. Some people really hated the idea that individuals they'd known all their lives had another side, a mysterious life, unbeknownst, isn't that a great word? It had been on my Word of the Day calendar the week before, to the general public. That was the impression I'd gotten before, and it seemed that still held true. No one was budging on that position. The wares got angrier, and the public got more frightened. At least a very vocal part of the public. There had been demonstrations and riots in Redding, California, and Lansing, Michigan. I wondered if there were going to be riots here or in Shreveport. I found that hard to believe and painful to picture. I looked through the kitchen window at the gathering dusk, as if I expected to see a crowd of villagers with torches marching to Merlot's. It was a curiously empty evening. There wasn't much to clean up after I'd eaten. My laundry was up to date, and there was nothing on television I wanted to watch. I checked my email. No message from Judith Vardaman. There was a message from Al Seed.
"Sucky, we've set the pack meeting for Monday night at 8 at my house. We've been trying to find a shaman for the judging. I'll see you and Jason then."
It had been nearly a week since we'd found Basim's body in the woods, and this was the first I'd heard. The pack's day or two had stretched into 6, and that meant it had been a very long time since I'd heard from Eric. I called Jason again and left voicemail on his cell phone. I tried not to worry about the pack meeting, but every time I'd been with the whole pack, something violent had happened. I thought again about the dead man in the grave and the clearing. Who had put him there? Presumably the killer had wanted Basim's silence, but the body hadn't been planted on my land by mistake. I read for 30 minutes or so, and then it was full dark, and I felt Eric's presence, and then the lesser though undeniable company of the other 2 vampires. As soon as they woke, I felt tired. This made me so twitchy I broke my own resolution. I knew that Eric realized I was unhappy and worried. It was impossible for him not to know that. Maybe he thought by keeping me away he was protecting me. Maybe he didn't know that his maker and Alexei were both in my consciousness. I took a deep breath and called him. The phone rang, and I pressed it to my ear as though I were holding Eric himself. But I thought, and I wouldn't have believed this possible a week ago, what if he doesn't pick up? The phone rang, and I held my breath. After the second ring, Eric answered. "The pack meeting has been set," I blurted.
"Suki,"
he said,
"can you come here?"
On my drive to Shreveport, I wondered at least 4 times if I was doing the right thing, but I concluded that whether I was right or wrong in running to see Eric when he asked me to was simply a dead issue. We were both on the ends of the line stretched between us, a line spun from blood. It trumped how we felt about each other at any given moment. I knew he was tired and desperate. He knew I was angry, uneasy, hurt. I wondered, though, if I'd called him and said the same thing, would he have hopped into his car or into the sky and arrived on my doorstep? They were all at Fantasia, he'd said. I was shocked to see how few cars were parked in front of the only vampire bar in Shreveport. Fantasia was a huge tourist draw in a town that was boasting a tourist increase, and I'd expected it to be packed. There were almost as many cars parked in the employee parking at the back as there were at the main door. That had never happened before. Maxwell Lee, an African-American businessman who also happened to be a vampire, was on duty at the rear entrance, and that was a first, too. The rear door had never been specially guarded because the vampires were so sure they could take care of themselves. Yet here he was, wearing his usual 3-piece suit, but doing a task he normally would have considered beneath him. He didn't look resentful. He looked worried. I said, "Where are they?" He jerked his head toward the main room of the bar.
"I'm glad you're here,"
he said, and I knew Eric's maker's visit wasn't going well. So often having out-of-town visitors is awkward, huh? You take them to see local sights, you try to feed them and keep them entertained, but then you're really wishing they would leave. It wasn't hard to see that Eric was on his last nerve. He was sitting in a booth with Appius Livius Ocella and Alexei. Of course, Alexei looked too young to be in a bar, and that added to the absurdity of the moment. "Good evening," I said stiffly. "Eric, you wanted to see me?" Eric scooted over closer to the wall so I'd have plenty of room, and I sat by him. Appius Livius and Alexei both greeted me, Appius with a strained smile, and Alexei with more ease. When we were all together, I discovered that being close to them relaxed the tense thread inside me, the thread that bound us all together.
"I've missed you,"
Eric said so quietly that at first I thought I'd imagined it. I wouldn't refer to the fact that he'd been completely out of touch for days. He knew that. It took all my self-control to bite back a few choice words. "As I was trying to tell you over the phone, the pack meeting about Basim has been set for Monday night."
"Where and when?"
he said, and there was a note in his voice that let me know he was not a happy camper. Well, he could pitch his tent right alongside mine. "At Alcide's house, the one that used to be his dad's, at 8 o'clock.
"And Jason's going with you, without a doubt?"
"I haven't talked to him yet, but I left him a message."
"You've been angry with me."
"I've been worried about you." I couldn't tell him anything about how I'd felt that he didn't already know.
"Yes,"
Eric said. His voice was empty.
"Eric is an excellent host,"
the Tsarevich said, as if I expected a report. I scratched up a smile to offer the boy. "That's good to hear, Alexei. What have you two been doing? I don't think you've ever been to Shreveport before."
"No,"
Appius Livius said in his curious accent.
"We hadn't been here to visit. It's a nice little city. My older son has been doing his best to keep us busy and out of trouble."
Okay, that had been a tad on the sarcastic side. I could tell from Eric's tension that he hadn't entirely succeeded in the keeping them out of trouble part of his agenda. "The World Market is fun. You can get stuff from all over the world there. And Shreveport was the capital of the Confederacy for a while. Jeez Louise, I needed to do better than that." If you go to the municipal auditorium, you can see Elvis's dressing room, I said brightly. I wondered if Bubba ever visited there to see his old stomping grounds. I had a very good teenager last night, Alexei said, matching my cheerful tone, as though he'd said he'd run a red light. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. If I said the wrong thing, I might be dead right then and there. Alexei, I said, sounding much calmer than I felt. You have to watch it. That's against the law here. Your maker and Eric could both suffer for it. Then I was with my human family. I could do anything I wanted, Alexei said. I really couldn't read his voice at all. I was so sick, they indulged me. Eric twitched. I can sure understand that, I said. Any family would be tempted to do that with a sick child. But since you're well now, and you've had a lot of years to mature, I know you understand that doing exactly what you want to do is not a good plan. I thought of at least 20 other things I could have said, but I stopped right there, and that was a good thing. Appius Livius looked directly into my eyes and nodded almost imperceptibly. I don't look grown up, Alexei said. Again, too many options on what I could say. The boy, the old boy, definitely expected me to answer. No, and it's an awful pity what happened to you and your family, but... And Alexei reached over, took my hand, and showed me what had happened to him and his family. I saw the cellar, the royal family, the doctor, the maid, facing the men who had come to kill them, and I heard the guns fire, and the bullets found their marks. Or, in the case of the women, they didn't, since the royal women had sewn jewels into their clothes for the escape that never came about. The jewels saved their lives for all of a few seconds, until the soldiers killed each groaning and bleeding and screaming individual. His mother, his father, his sisters, his doctor, his mother's maid, the cook, his father's valet, and his dog. And after the shooting, the soldiers went around with bayonets. I thought I was going to throw up. I swayed where I sat, and Eric's cold arm went around me. Alexei had let go, and I was never gladder of anything in my life. I would not have touched the child again for anything. You see, Alexei said triumphantly. You see, I should be free to go my own way. No, I said, and I was proud that my voice was firm. No matter how we suffer, we have an obligation to others. We have to be unselfish enough to try to live in the right way, so others can get through their own lives without us fouling them up. Alexei looked rebellious. That's what Master says too, he muttered. More or less. Master is right, I said, though the words tasted bad in my mouth. Master waved for the bartender to come over. Felicia slunk up to the table. She was tall and pretty and as gentle as a vampire can be. She had some fresh scars on her neck. What can I get you all? She said. Sookie, can I bring you a beer or... Some iced tea would be great, Felicia, I said. And some True Blood for all of you? She asked the vampires. Or we do have a bottle of royalty. Eric's eyes closed, and Felicia realized her blunder. Okay, she said briskly. True Blood for Eric, tea for Sookie. Thank you, I said, smiling up at the bartender. Pam strode up to the table. She was trailing the gauzy black costume she wore at Fantasia, and she was as close to panic as I'd ever seen her. Excuse me, she said, bowing in the direction of the guests. Eric, Catherine Boudreau is visiting Fantasia tonight. She's with Sally and a small party. Eric looked as if he were going to explode. Tonight, he said, and one word spoke volumes. With much regret, Ocala, I must ask you and Alexei to go back to my office. Appius Livius got up without asking for further explanation, and Alexei, to my surprise, followed him without any questions. If Eric had been in the habit of breathing, I would say that he exhaled with relief when his visitors had left his sight. He said a few things in an ancient tongue, but I didn't know which one. Then, a stout, attractive blonde in her 40s was standing by the table, another woman right behind her. "You must be Catherine Boudreau," I said pleasantly. "I'm Sookie Stackhouse. I'm Eric's girlfriend."
"Hi, honey. I'm Catherine," she said. "This is my partner, Sally. We're here with some friends who are curious about my job. I try to visit all the vampire workplaces during the year, and we hadn't been to Fantasia in months. Since I'm based right here in Shreveport, I ought to make it in more often."
"We're so glad you're here,"
Eric said smoothly. He sounded like his normal self.
"Sally, always good to see you. How's the tax business?"
Sally, a slim brunette whose hair was just beginning to gray, laughed. "Taxes are booming as always," she said. "You ought to know, Eric. You pay enough of them."
"It's good to see how vampire citizens getting along with our human citizens,"
Catherine said heartily, looking around the bar, which was so thinly populated it almost wasn't open. Her blonde eyebrows contracted slightly for a moment, but that was the only sign Ms. Boudreau gave that she noticed Eric's business was down. Pam said, "Your table is ready." She swept her hand toward 2 tables that had been put together for the party, and the state BVA agent said,
"Excuse me, Eric, I've got to go pay attention to my company."
After a shower of pleasantries and pleased to meet yous, we were finally by ourselves, if sitting in a booth in the middle of a bar can be counted as being by ourselves. Pam started over, but Eric checked her with a raised finger. He took my hand with one of his and rested his forehead on his other hand. "Can you tell me what's up with you?" I said bluntly. "This is awful. It's very hard to have faith in us when I don't know what's happening."
"Okela has had some business to discuss with me,"
Eric said.
"Some unwelcome business. And as you saw, my half-brother is ailing."
"Yes, he shared that with me," I said. It was still hard to believe what I'd seen and suffered with a child through his memory of the deaths of everyone he'd loved. The Tsarevich of Russia, sole survivor of a mass murder, could use some counseling. Maybe he and Dermot could be in the same therapy group. You don't go through something like that and come out Mr. Mental Health, but I've never experienced anything like that. I know it must have been hell for him, but I've got to say...
"You don't want to go through it too,"
Eric said.
"You're not alone in that. It's clearest for us. Okela, me, you. But he can share that with other people too. It's not as detailed for them, they tell me. No one wants that memory. We all carry plenty of our own bad memories. I'm afraid that he may not be able to survive as a vampire."
He paused, turning the bottle of True Blood around and around on the table.
"Apparently it's a nightly grind to get Alexei to do the simplest things, and not to do others. You heard his remark about the teenager? I don't want to go into the details. However, have you read the papers lately? The Shreveport papers?"
"You mean Alexei might be responsible for those 2 murders?" I could only sit there staring at Eric. "The stab wounds? The throats? But he's so small and young."
"He's insane," Eric said. "Okela finally told me that Alexei had had episodes like this before, not as severe. It has led him to consider, very reluctantly, giving Alexei the final death."
"You mean putting him to sleep?" I said, not sure I'd heard him right. "Like a dog?" Eric looked me straight in the eyes.
"Okela loves the boy, but he cannot be allowed to kill people or other vampires when these fits take him. Such incidents will get into the paper. What if he were caught? What if some Russian recognized him as a result of the notoriety? What would that do to our relationship with the Russian vampires? Most important, Okela cannot keep track of him every moment. 2 times the boy has gotten out on his own, and 2 deaths resulted in my area. He'll subvert all we're trying to do here in the United States. Not that my maker cares about my position in this country," Eric added, a little bitterly.
I gave Eric a sort of heavy pat on the cheek. Not a slap, a heavy pat. "Yeah, let's not forget the 2 dead men," I said, "that Alexei murdered in a painful and horrible way. I mean, I realize that this is all about him and your maker and your personal cred, but let's spare a tip of the hat to those guys he killed." Eric shrugged. He was worried, and he was at his wit's end, and he didn't care at all about the deaths of 2 humans. He was probably thankful that Alexei had picked victims who wouldn't attract much sympathy and whose deaths were easily explained. Gang members killed one another all the time, after all. I gave up on making my point, at least partly because I'd had a thought. If Alexei was capable of turning against his own kind, maybe we could steer him onto Victor. I shuddered. I was creeping myself out. So, your maker brought Alexei to you, hoping that you'd have some bright ideas about keeping your half-brother alive, teaching him some self-control?
Yes, that's one of the reasons he's here.
Appius Livius having sex with the kid can't be helping Alexei's mental health, I said, since I simply couldn't not say it.
Please understand. In Okella's time, that was not a consideration.
Eric said,
Alexei would be old enough in those times, and men of a certain station were free to indulge themselves with very little guilt or question. Okella doesn't think in the modern way about such things. As it happens, Alexei has become so... well, they are not having sex now. Okella is an honorable man.
Eric sounded very intent, very serious, as if he had to persuade me of his maker's integrity, and all this concern was about the man who'd murdered him. But if Eric admired Okella, respected him, didn't I have to do the same? And it popped into my head that Eric wasn't doing anything for his brother that I wouldn't do for mine. Then I had another unwelcome thought, and my mouth went dry. If Appius Livius isn't having sex with Alexei, who is he having sex with? I asked in a small voice.
I know this is your business, since we're married. Something I've insisted on, and you've belittled,
Eric said, and the bitterness was back in his voice.
I can only tell you that I'm not having sex with my maker. But I would, if he told me that was what he wanted. I would have no choice.
I tried to think of a way to round this conversation off, escape with some dignity. Eric, you're busy with your visitors. Busy in a way I'd never imagined. I'm going to that meeting at Alcide's Monday night. I'll tell you what happens, when and if you call me. There are a couple of things I need to bring you up to speed on, if you ever have a chance to come to my place to talk. Like Dermot appearing on my doorstep, that was a story Eric would be interested to hear, and God knows I wanted to tell him about it, but now was not the right time.
If they stay until Tuesday, I'm going to see you no matter what they're doing.
Eric told me. He sounded a little more like himself.
We'll make love. I feel like buying you a present.
That sounds like a great night to me, I said, feeling a surge of hope. I don't need a present, just you. So I'll see you Tuesday, no matter what? That's what you said, right?
That's what I said.
Okay then, until Tuesday.
I love you,
Eric said in a drained voice.
And you are my wife, in the only way that matters to me.
Love you too, I said, passing on the last half of his closing statement because I didn't know what it meant. I got up to go, and Pam appeared by my side to walk me to my car. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Eric get up and walk over to the boudoir table to make sure his important visitors were happy. Pam said,
He'll ruin Eric if he stays.
How so?
The boy will kill again, and we won't be able to cover it up. He can escape if you so much as blink. He has to be watched constantly. Yet, Okella argues with himself about putting the boy down.
Pam, let Okella decide, I warned her. I thought since we were by ourselves, I could take the huge liberty of calling Eric's maker by his personal name. I'm serious. Eric will have to let him kill you if you take Alexei out.
You care, don't you?
Pam was unexpectedly touched. You're my bud, I said. Of course I care.
We are friends,
Pam said. You know it.
This isn't going to end well,
Pam said as I got in my car. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. She was right. I ate a Little Debbie cinnamon roll when I got home, just because I thought I deserved one. I was so worried I couldn't even think of going to bed just yet. Alexei had given me his own personal nightmare. I'd never heard of a vampire, or any other being, human or not, being able to transmit a memory like that. It struck me as peculiarly horrible that it should be Alexei who was so gifted when he had such a ghastly memory to share. I went through the royal family's excruciating ordeal again. I could understand why the boy was the way he was, but I could also understand why he might have to be put to sleep. I pushed up from the table, feeling thoroughly exhausted. I was ready for bed. But my plan got altered when the doorbell rang. You'd think, living out in the country at the end of a long driveway through the woods, that I would have plenty of warning of guests, but that wasn't always the case, especially with soups. I didn't recognize the woman I saw through the peephole, but I knew she was a vampire. That meant she couldn't come in without being invited, so it was safe to find out why she was there. I opened the door, feeling mostly curious. "Hi, can I help you?" I asked. She looked me up and down. "Are you Sookie Stackhouse?" "I am." "You emailed me." Alexei had blown out my brain cells. I was slow tonight. "Judith Vardaman?" "The same." "So, Lorena was your sire? Your maker?" "She was." "Please come in," I said, and stepped aside. I might have been making a big mistake, but I'd almost given up hope that Judith would respond to my message. Since she'd come all the way here from Little Rock, I thought I owed her that much trust. Judith raised her eyebrows and stepped over my threshold. "You must love Bill, or else you're a fool," she said. "Neither, I hope. You want some True Blood?" "Not now, thank you." "Please, have a seat." I sat on the edge of the recliner while Judith took the couch. I thought it was incredible that Lorena had made both Bill and Judith. I wanted to ask a lot of questions, but I didn't want to offend or irritate this vampire who'd already done me a huge favor. "Do you know Bill?" I said, to kick off the talk we had to have. "Yes, I know him." She seemed cautious, which was odd when I considered how much stronger she was than I. "You're the younger sister?" She looked to be about 30, or at least that had been her death age. She had dark brown hair and blue eyes, and she was short and pleasantly round. She was one of the most non-threatening vampires I'd ever met, at least superficially, and she looked oddly familiar. "I beg your pardon?" "Lorena turned you after she turned Bill. Why'd she pick you?" "You were Bill's lover for some months, I gather, reading between the lines of your message?" she asked in turn. "Yes, I was. I'm with someone else now." "How is it that he never told you how he came to meet Lorena?" "I don't know. His choice?" "Very strange." She looked openly distrustful. "You can think it's strange till the cows come home," I said. "I don't know why Bill didn't tell me, but he didn't. If you want to tell me, fine, tell me. But that's not really important. The important thing is that Bill's not getting well. He got bitten by a fairy with silver-tipped teeth. If he has your blood, he might get over it." "Did Bill perhaps hint to you that you should ask me?" "No, ma'am, he didn't. But I hate to see him hurting." "Has he mentioned my name?" No. I found out by myself so I could get in touch with you. It seems to me that if you're Lorena's get, too, you must have known he was suffering. I find myself wondering why you haven't shown up before." "I'll tell you why." Judith's voice was ominous. Oh, great. Another tale of pain and suffering. I knew I wasn't gonna like this story. I was right. Chapter 12. Judith began her story by asking me a question. "Have you ever met Lorena?" "Yes," I said, and left it at that. Evidently, Judith didn't know exactly how I'd met Lorena, which had been a few seconds before I drove a stake through her heart and ended her long, nasty life. "Then you know she's ruthless." I nodded. "You need to know why I've stayed away from Bill all these years, when I'm very fond of him," Judith said. "Lorena has had a hard life. I wouldn't necessarily believe everything she's told me, but I've heard confirmation of a few parts of it from others." Judith wasn't seeing me anymore. She was looking past me, down the years, I guess. "How old was she?" I said, just to keep the story rolling. By the time Lorena met Bill, she had been a vampire for many decades. She had been turned in 1788 by a man named Solomon Brunswick. He met her in a brothel in New Orleans. He met her in the obvious way?
Not exactly. He was there to take blood from another whore, one who specialized in the odder desires of men. Compared to some of her other customers, a little bite wasn't anything too remarkable.
Had Solomon been a vampire a long time?
I was curious despite myself.
Vampires as living history. Well, since they'd come out of the coffin, they'd added a lot to college courses. Bring a vampire to class to tell his or her story, and you got great attendance.
Solomon had been a vampire for 20 years by then. He became a vampire by accident. He was a sort of tinker. He sold pots and pans, and he mended broken ones. He had other goods that were hard to find in New England then. Needles, thread, odds and ends like that. He took his horse and cart from town to town and farm to farm, all by himself. Solomon encountered one of us while he camped in the woods one night. He told me that he survived the first encounter, but the vampire followed him during the night to his next camp and attacked him again. This second attack was a critical one. Solomon was one of the unfortunates who get turned accidentally, since the vampire who drank from him left him for dead, unaware of the change, or at least I like to think so. Solomon was untrained and had to learn all by himself.
Sounds really awful, I said, and I meant that.
She nodded. It must have been. He worked his way down to New Orleans to avoid people who wondered why he hadn't aged, where he came upon Lorena. After he'd had his meal, he was leaving out the back when he spotted her in the dark courtyard. She was with a man. The customer tried to leave without paying, and in the blink of an eye, Lorena seized him and cut his throat. That sounded like the Lorena I'd known. Solomon was impressed with her savagery and excited by the fresh blood. He grabbed the dying man and drained him, and when he threw the body into the yard of the next house, Lorena was impressed and fascinated. She wanted to be like he was.
That sounds about right.
Judith smiled faintly. She was illiterate but tenacious and a tremendous survivor. He was far more intelligent, but he had poor killing skills. By then, he had figured some things out, and so he was able to bring her over. They took blood from each other sometimes, and that gave them the courage to find others like us, to learn what they needed to learn to live well instead of merely surviving. The two of them practiced how to be successful vampires, tested the limits of their new natures, and made an excellent team.
So Solomon was your grandfather since he begat Lorena? I said biblically. What happened after that?
Eventually, the bloom went off the rose, Judith said. Makers and their children stay together longer than a merely sexual couple, but not forever. Lorena betrayed Solomon. She was caught with the half-drained body of a dead child, but she was able to play a human woman pretty convincingly. She told the man who grabbed her that Solomon was the one who'd killed the child, that he'd made her carry the body so the blood was all over her. Solomon barely got out of the town alive, and they were in Natchez, Mississippi. He never saw Lorena again. He's never met Bill either. Lorena found him after the war between the states. As Bill later told me, one night Lorena was wandering through this area. It was much harder then to stay concealed, especially in rural areas. There weren't as many people to hunt you down, true, and there was little or no communication, but strangers were conspicuous, and with the thinner population, the choices of prey were less. An individual death was noticed more. A body had to be hidden very carefully or the death meticulously staged. At least, there wasn't much organized law enforcement. I reminded myself not to look disgusted. This knowledge was nothing new. That was how vampires had lived until a few years ago. Lorena saw Bill and his family through the windows of their house. Judith looked away. She fell in love.
For several nights, she listened to the family. During the day, she would dig a hole in the woods and bury herself. At night, she'd watch. Finally, she decided to act. She realized, even Lorena realized, Bill would never forgive her if she killed his children. So she waited until he came out in the middle of the night to find out why the dog wouldn't stop barking. When Bill came out with his rifle, she crept up behind him and took him. I thought of Lorena, so close to my own family, right through the woods. She could have come to my great-great-grandparents' place just as easily, and my whole family history would have been different. She turned him that night, buried him, and helped him resurrect 3 nights later. I couldn't imagine how shattered Bill must have been. Everything gone in the blink of an eye. His whole life taken and altered and given back to him in a terrible form. I guess she took him away from here, I said. Yes, that was essential. She had arranged a death for him. She'd smeared a clearing with his blood and left his gun there and rags from his clothing. He told me it looked as though a panther had gotten him. So they traveled together, and while he was bound to her, he hated her too. He was miserable with her, but she remained obsessed with him. After 30 years, she tried to make him happier by killing a woman who looked very much like his wife. Oh gosh, I said, trying not to feel sick. You, huh? That was why her face had been vaguely familiar. I'd seen Bill's old family pictures. Judith nodded. Evidently, Bill saw me entering a neighbor's house, going to a party with my family. He followed me home and watched me because the resemblance caught his fancy. When Lorena discovered this new interest, she thought Bill would stay with her if she provided him with a companion. I'm sorry, I said. I'm really, really sorry. Judith shrugged. It wasn't Bill's fault, but you'll understand why I had to think about it before I came in answer to your message. Solomon is in Europe now, or I would have asked him to come with me. I dread seeing Lorena again, and I was afraid she would be here. Afraid you would have asked her to help Bill too, or she might have made up this story to bring me here for all I knew. Is she around? She's dead. Didn't you know? Judith's round blue eyes went wide. She couldn't be any more pale, but her eyes closed for a long moment. I felt a strong wrench around 18 months ago. That was Lorena's death? I nodded. That's why she hasn't summoned me. Oh, this is wonderful, wonderful. Judith looked like a different woman. I guess I'm a little surprised that Bill didn't get in touch with you to tell you. Maybe he thought I would know it. Children and makers are bound. But I wasn't sure. It seemed too good to be true. Judith smiled, and she looked suddenly pretty, even with the fangs. Where is Bill? He's through the woods. I pointed in the right direction. In his old home. I'll be able to track him once I'm outside, she said happily. Oh, to be with him without Lorena near. What? Before, it had been okay for Judith to sit and talk my ear off, but now all of a sudden she was ready to take off like a scalded cat. I was sitting there with my eyes narrowed, wondering what I'd done. I'll heal him, and I'm sure he'll thank you after, she said, and I felt like I'd been dismissed. Was Bill there when Lorena died? Yeah, I said. Did he suffer much punishment for killing her? He didn't kill her, I said. I did. She froze, staring at me as if I'd suddenly announced I was King Kong. She said, I owe you my freedom. Bill must think very highly of you. I believe he does, I said. To my embarrassment, she bent to kiss my hand. Her lips were cold. Bill and I can be together now, she said. Finally. I'll see you another night to tell you how grateful I am, but now I have to go to him. and she was out of the house and zipping through the woods to the south before I could say Jack Robinson. I kind of felt like a very large fist had hit me upside the head. I would be a total sleaze to feel anything but happy for Bill. Now he could hang around with Judith for centuries if he wanted to, with the never-aging duplicate of his wife. I made myself smile with gladness. When looking happy didn't make me happy, I did 20 jumping jacks, then 20 push-ups. Okay, that's better, I thought, as I lay on my stomach on the living room floor. Now I was ashamed that my arm muscles were trembling. I remembered the workouts the Lady Falcons softball coach had put us through, and I knew Coach Peterson would kick my butt if she could see me now. On the other hand, I wasn't 17 anymore. As I rolled over to lie on my back, I considered that fact soberly. It wasn't the first occasion I'd felt the passage of time, but it was the first occasion that I'd noticed my body had changed into something a little less efficient. I had to contrast that with the lot of the vampires I knew. At least 99% of them had become vamps at the peak of their lives. There were a few who'd been younger, like Alexei, and a few who had been older, like the ancient Pythoness, but most of them had ranged in age from 16 to 35 at the time of their first death. They'd never have to apply for Social Security or Medicare. They'd never need to worry about hip replacements or lung cancer or arthritis. By the time I reached middle age, if I was so lucky, since my life was what you would call high risk, I would be slowing down in perceptible ways. After that, the wrinkles would only grow and deepen, my skin would look looser on my bones and sport a spot or two, and my hair would thin out. My chin would sag a little, and my boobs would too. My joints would ache when I sat too long in one position. I'd have to get reading glasses. I might develop high blood pressure. I might have a blocked artery. My heart might beat irregularly. When I got the flu, I would be very sick. I'd fear Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, a stroke, pneumonia, the boogie bears that hid under the beds of the aging. What if I told Eric I wanted to be with him forever? Assuming he didn't scream and run as fast as he could in the other direction, assuming he actually changed me, I tried to imagine what being a vampire would be like. I would watch all my friends grow old and die. I would sleep in the hidey hole in the closet floor myself. If Jason married Michelle, she might not like me holding their babies. I would feel the urge to attack people, to bite them. They'd all be walking McBloodburgers to me. I'd think of people as food. I stared up at the ceiling fan and tried to imagine wanting to bite Andy Bellefleur or Holly. Yuck. On the other hand, I'd never be sick again unless someone shot me or bit me with silver or staked me or put me out in the sun. I could protect frail humans from danger. I could be with Eric forever. Except for that bit where vampire couples usually didn't stay together all that long. Okay, I could still be with Eric for a few years. How would I make my living? I could only take the later shift at Merlotte's, and that after dark had fallen, if Sam let me keep my job. And Sam, too, would grow old and die. A new owner might not like having a permanent barmaid who could only work one shift. I could go back to college and take night classes and computer classes until I got some kind of degree. In what? I'd reached the limit of my imagination. I rolled to my knees and rose from the floor, wondering if I was imagining a slight stiffness in my joints. Sleep was long in coming that night, despite my very long and very scary day. The silence of the house pressed in around me. Claude came home in the wee hours, whistling. When I got up the next morning, not bright but way too early, I felt sluggish and dispirited. I found 2 envelopes shoved under my front door on my way to the porch with my coffee. The first note was from Mr. Catalides, and it had been hand-delivered by his niece, Diantha, at 3 a.m., she'd noted on the envelope. I was sorry to miss a chance to talk to Diantha, though I was grateful she hadn't woken me. I opened that envelope first, out of sheer curiosity.
"Dear Miss Stackhouse,"
Mr. Catalides wrote,
"here is a check for the amount in Claudine Crane's account when she passed away. She wanted you to have it."
Short and to the point, which was more than most people I'd talked to recently. I flipped the check over and found that it was for $150,000. "Oh my God," I said out loud. "Oh my God." I dropped it because my fingers suddenly lost their power and the check drifted down to the porch. I scrambled to retrieve it and read it again to make sure I hadn't been mistaken. "Oh," I said. I was sticking with the classics because saying anything else seemed to be beyond me. I couldn't even imagine what I would do with so much money. That was beyond me too. I had to give myself a little space until I could think about this unexpected legacy with any rational plan. I carried the amazing check into the house and put it in a drawer, terrified something would happen to it before I got it to the bank. Only when I was sure it was safe did I even think of opening my other note, which was from Bill. I carried it back out to the porch chair and took a gulp of my cooling coffee. I tore open the envelope.
Dearest Sookie, I didn't want to frighten you by knocking on your door at 2 a.m, so I'm leaving this for you to read in the daylight. I wondered why you'd been in my house last week. I knew you'd come in, and I knew that sooner or later your motive would become apparent. Your generous heart has given me the cure I needed. I never thought I would see Judith after the last time we parted. There were reasons I didn't call her over the years. I understand she told you why Lorena picked her to turn vampire. Lorena didn't ask me before she attacked Judith. Please believe this. I would never condemn someone to our life unless she wanted it and told me so.
Okay, Bill was giving me credit for some complicated thinking. I'd never dreamed of suspecting that Bill had asked Lorena to find him a mate resembling his late wife.
I would never have been brave enough to contact Judith myself, for fear she hated me. I am so glad to see her again. And her blood, freely given, has already worked a great healing in me.
All right, that had been the whole point.
Judith has agreed to stay for a week so we can catch up with each other. Maybe you will join us some evening? Judith was most impressed with your kindness. Love, Bill.
I forced myself to smile down at the folded piece of paper. I'd just write him right back and tell him how pleased I was that he was better and that he'd renewed his old relationship with Judith. Of course, I hadn't been happy when he was dating Seela Pumphrey, a human real estate dealer, because we had only recently broken up, and I knew he didn't really care about her. Now I was determined to be happy for Bill. I was not going to be one of those awful people who gets all bent out of shape when the ex acquires a replacement. That was hypocritical and selfish to the extreme, and I hoped I was a better person than that. At least, I was determined to provide a good imitation of such a person. "Okay," I said to my coffee mug. "That turned out great."
Would you rather talk to me than to your coffee? Claude asked.
I'd heard feet on the creaky stairs through the open window, and I'd registered that another brain was up and working, but I hadn't foreseen that he'd join me on the porch. "You got in late," I said. "You want me to get you a cup of coffee? I made plenty."
No, thank you. I'll have some pineapple juice in a minute. It's a beautiful day.
Claude was shirtless. At least he was wearing drawstring pants with the Dallas Cowboys all over them. Ha! He wished. "Yeah," I said, with a marked lack of enthusiasm. Claude raised one perfectly shaped black eyebrow.
"Who's down in the dumps?" he asked.
"No, I'm very happy."
"Yes, I can see the joy written all over your face. What's the matter, cousin?"
"I did get the check from Claudine's estate. God bless her. That was so generous." I looked up at Claude, putting all my sincerity into my face. "Claude, I hope you're not mad at me. That's just so much money. I haven't got a clue what I want to do with it."
Claude shrugged. That was what Claudine wished. "Now, tell me what's wrong."
"Claude, you'll have to excuse me being surprised that you care. I would have said you didn't give a flying F how I felt. Now you're being all sweet with Hunter, and you're offering to help me clean out the attic."
Maybe I'm developing a cousinly concern for you.
He raised one eyebrow. "Maybe pigs will fly." He laughed.
"I'm trying to be more human," he confessed. "Since I'll live out my long existence among humans, apparently, I'm trying to be more
likable," I supplied. "Ouch," he said, but he wasn't really hurt. Being hurt would presuppose that he cared about my opinion, and that was something you couldn't be taught, right? "Where's the boyfriend been?" he asked.
I do so love the smell of vampire around the house.
"Last night was the first time I've seen him in a week, and we didn't have any alone time."
You two have a fight?
Claude settled one hip on the porch railing, and I could tell he was determined to show me he could be interested in someone else's life. I felt a certain amount of exasperation. "Claude, I'm drinking my very first cup of coffee, and I didn't get a lot of sleep, and I've had a bad few days. Could you just scoot away and take a shower or something?" He sighed as if I'd broken his heart.
"All right, I can take a hint," he said.
That really wasn't so much a hint as an outright statement.
"Oh, I'll go."
But as he straightened up and took a step toward the door, I realized I did have something else to say. "I take that back. There is something we have to talk about," I said. "I haven't had a chance to tell you that Dermot was here." Claude stood up straight, almost as if he were prepared to bolt.
"What did he say? What did he want?"
"I'm not sure what he wanted. I think, like you, he wanted to be close to someone else with a bit of fairy blood, and he wanted to tell me that he was under a spell." Claude paled.
"From whose magic? Has grandfather come back through the gate?"
"No," I said. "But could a fairy have cast a spell on him before the gate closed? And I think you must know there's another full-blooded fairy on this side of the portal, or gate, whatever you call it." As I understood fairy morals, it was not possible to answer me with a direct lie.
"Dermot is crazy," Claude said. "I have no idea what he'll do next. If he approached you directly, he must be under extreme pressure. You know how ambivalent he is about humans."
"You didn't answer my question."
"No," Claude said. "I didn't. And there's a reason for that."
He turned his back to me and looked out over the yard.
"I like my head on my shoulders."
"So there is someone else around, and you know who it is? Or you know more about putting spells on than you're admitting?"
"I'm not going to talk about it."
And Claude went inside. Within minutes, I heard him going out the back of the house, and his car passed by on its way down the drive to Hummingbird Road. So I had gained a valuable piece of knowledge that was completely useless. I couldn't summon up the fairy, ask the fairy why he or she was still on this side, what his or her intentions were. But if I had to guess, I would have to say I was pretty sure that Claude wouldn't be this frightened of a sweet fairy who wanted to spread goodness and light. And a really nice fairy wouldn't have put some spell on poor Dermot and made him so discombobulated. I said a prayer or two, hoping that would restore my normal good mood, but it didn't work today. Possibly I wasn't approaching prayer in the right spirit. Communicating with God isn't the same as taking a happy pill. Far from it. I pulled on a dress and sandals and went to Gran's grave. Having a conversation with her usually reminded me of how level-headed and wise she'd been. Today, all I thought about was her wildly out-of-character indiscretion with a half-fairy that had resulted in my dad and his sister Linda. My grandmother maybe had sex with a half-fairy because my grandfather couldn't make babies. So she'd gotten to carry and birth her children, 2 of them, and she'd raised them with love. And she'd buried both of them. As I crouched by the headstone, looking down at the grass that was getting thicker on her grave, I wondered if I should draw some meaning from that. You could make a case that Gran had done something she shouldn't have to get something she wasn't supposed to get, and after she'd gotten it, she'd lost it in the most painful way imaginable. What could be worse than losing a child? Losing 2 children. Or you could decide that everything that had happened was completely at random, that Gran had done the best she could at the moment she'd had to make a decision, and that her decision simply hadn't worked out for reasons equally beyond her control. Constant blame or constant blamelessness. There had to be better choices. I did the best possible thing for me to do. I put in some earrings and went to church. Easter was over, but the flowers on the Methodist altar were still beautiful. The windows were open because the temperature was pleasant. A few clouds were gathering in the west, but nothing to worry about for the next few hours. I listened to every word of the sermon, and I sang along with the hymns, though I kept that down to a whisper because I have a terrible voice. It was good for me. It reminded me of Gran and my childhood, and faith and clean dresses and Sunday lunch, usually a roast surrounded by potatoes and carrots that Gran put in the oven before we left the house. She would have made a pie or a cake, too. Church isn't always easy when you can read the minds around you, and I worked very hard on blocking them out and thinking my own thoughts in an attempt to connect to the part of my upbringing, the part of myself that was good and kind and intent on trying to become better. When the service was over, I talked to Maxine Fortenberry, who was in seventh heaven over Hoyt and Holly's wedding plans, and I saw Charles E. Tootin toting her grandbaby, and I talked to my insurance agent, Greg O'Bear, who had his whole family with him. His daughter turned red when I looked at her, because I knew a few things about her that made her conscience twinge. But I wasn't judging the girl. We all misbehave from time to time. Some of us get caught, and some of us don't. Sam was in church, too, to my surprise. I'd never seen him there before. As far as I knew, he'd never been to any church in Bon Ton. "I'm glad to see you," I said, trying not to sound too startled. "You been going somewhere else, or is this a new venture?"
"I just felt it was time," he said. "For one thing, I like church. For another thing, a bad time is coming for us two-natured folks, and I want to make sure everyone in Bon Ton knows I'm an okay guy."
"They'd have to be fools not to know that already," I said quietly. "Good to see you, Sam." I moved off because a couple of people were waiting to talk to my boss, and I understood that he was trying to anchor his position in the community. I tried not to worry about Eric or anything else the rest of the day. I'd had a text message inviting me to have lunch with Tara and JB, and I was glad to have their company. Tara had gotten Dr. Dinwiddie to check very carefully, and sure enough, he'd found another heartbeat. She and JB were stunned, in a happy way. Tara had fixed creamed chicken to spoon over biscuits, and she'd made a spinach casserole and a fruit salad. I had a great time at their little house, and JB checked my wrists and said they were almost back to normal. Tara was all excited about the baby shower JB's aunt was planning on giving them in Clarice, and she assured me I'd get an invitation. We picked a date for her shower in Bon Ton, and she promised she'd register online. By the time I got home, I figured I'd better put a load of wash in, and I washed my bath mat, too, and hung it out on the line to dry. While I was outside, I made sure I had my little plastic squirt gun, full of lemon juice, tucked in my pocket. I didn't want to get caught by surprise again. I just couldn't figure out what I'd done to deserve having an apparently, judging by Claude's reaction, hostile fairy tromping around my property. My cell phone rang as I trailed gloomily back to the house. "Hey, sis," Jason said. He was cooking on the grill. I could hear the sizzle. "Michelle and me are cooking out. You want to come? I got plenty of steak." "Thanks, but I ate at JB and Tara's. Give me a rain check on that."
"Sure thing. I got your message. Tomorrow at 8, right?"
"Yeah. Let's ride over to Shreveport together."
"Sure. I'll pick you up at 7 at your place."
"See you then."
"Gotta go."
Jason did not like long phone conversations. He'd broken up with girls who wanted to chat while they shaved their legs and painted their nails. It was not a great commentary on my life that the prospect of meeting with a bunch of unhappy wares seemed like a good time, or at least an interesting time. Kennedy was bartending when I got to work the next day. She told me that Sam had a final take-the-checkbook appointment with his accountant, who'd gotten an extension since Sam had been so late turning all the paperwork over. Kennedy looked as pretty as she always did. She refused to wear the shorts most of the rest of us wore in warm weather, instead opting for tailored khakis and a fancy belt with her Merlot's t-shirt. Kennedy's makeup and hair were pageant quality. I glanced automatically at Danny Prideaux's usual bar stool, empty. "Where's Danny?" I asked when I went to the bar to get a beer for Catfish Hennessy. He was Jason's boss, and I half expected to see Jason come in to join him, but Hoyt and a couple of the other roadwork guys sat at Catfish's table. "He had to work at his other job today," Kennedy said, trying to sound offhand. "I appreciate Sam making sure I've got protection while I'm working, Sookie, but I really don't think there's going to be any trouble." The bar door slammed. "I'm here to protest!" yelled a woman who looked like anyone's grandmother. She had a sign, and she hoisted it up. "No cohabitation with animals," it read, and you could see that she'd written cohabitation while she looked at a dictionary. Each letter was written with such care. "Call the police first," I told Kennedy, "and then Sam. Tell him to get back here no matter what he's talking about." Kennedy nodded and turned to the wall phone. Our protester was wearing a blue and white blouse and red pants she'd probably gotten at Beale's or Stage. She had short permed hair dyed a reasonable brown and wore wire-rimmed glasses and a modest wedding ring on her arthritic fingers. Despite this completely average exterior, I could feel her thoughts burning with the fire of a zealot. "Ma'am, you need to take yourself outside. This building is privately owned," I said, having no idea if this was a good line to take or not. We'd never had anyone protesting before. "But it's a public business. Anyone can come inside," she said, as if she were the authority. Not any more than I was. "No, not if Sam doesn't want them in here, and as his representative, I'm telling you to leave." "You're not Sam Merlot or his wife. You're that girl who dates a vampire," she said venomously. "I am Sam's right-hand person at this bar," I lied, "and I'm telling you to get out or I'll put you out." "You lay one finger on me and I'll call the law on you," she said, jerking her head. Rage flared up in me. I really don't like threats. "Kennedy," I said, and in a second she was standing by me. "I'd say between us we're strong enough to pick up this lady and take her out of the bar. What do you say?" "I'm all for it." Kennedy stared down at the woman as if she were only waiting for the starting gun to go off. "And you're that girl who shot her boyfriend," the woman said, beginning to look properly frightened. "I am. I was really mad at him, and at the moment I'm pretty pissed off at you," Kennedy said. "You get your butt out of here and take your little sign with you, and you do it right now." The older woman's courage broke, and she scuttled out, remembering at the last moment to keep her head up and her back straight, since she was one of God's soldiers. I got that direct from her head. Catfish clapped for Kennedy, and a few others joined in, but mostly the bar patrons sat in stunned silence. Then we heard the chanting from the parking lot, and we all surged to the windows. "Jesus Christ, Shepherd of Judea," I breathed. There were at least 30 protesters in the parking lot. Most of them were middle-aged, but I spotted a few teenagers who should have been in school, and I recognized a couple of guys who I knew to be in their early 20s. I sort of recognized most of the crowd. They attended a charismatic church in Clarice, a church that was growing by leaps and bounds, if construction was any indicator. The last time I'd driven by when I was going to have physical therapy with JB, a new activities building had been going up. I wish they were being active there, where they belonged, rather than here. Just as I was about to do something idiotic, like going out in the parking lot, 2 Bon-Ton police cars pulled up, lights flashing. Kevin and Kenya got out. Kevin was skinny and white, and Kenya was round and black. They were both good police officers, and they loved each other dearly, but unofficially. Kevin approached the chanting group with apparent confidence. I couldn't hear what he said, but they all turned to face him and began talking all at once. He held up his hands to pat the air in a back off and get quiet gesture, and Kenya circled around to come up behind the group. "Maybe we should go out there," Kennedy said. Kennedy, I noted, was not in the habit of sitting back and letting things take their course. Nothing wrong with being proactive, but this was not the time to escalate the confrontation in the parking lot, and that was what our presence would do. "No, I think we need to stay right here," I said. "There's no point in throwing fuel on the fire." I looked around. None of the patrons were eating or drinking. They were all looking out the windows. I thought of requesting that they sit down at their tables, but there was no point in asking them to do something they clearly weren't going to do, with so much drama going on outside. Antoine came out of the kitchen and stood by me. He looked at the scene for a long moment.
"I didn't have nothing to do with it,"
he said. "I never thought you did," I said, surprised. Antoine relaxed, even inside his head. "This is some crazy church action," I said. "They're picketing Merlots because Sam is too natured. But the woman who came in here, she was pretty aware of me, and she knew Kennedy's history too. I hope this is a one-shot. I'd hate to have to deal with protesters all the time." Sam will go broke if this keeps up, Kennedy said in a low voice. Maybe I should just quit. It's not going to help Sam that I work here. Kennedy, don't set yourself up to be a martyr, I said. They don't like me either. Everyone who doesn't think I'm crazy thinks there's something supernatural about me. We'd all have to quit, from Sam on down. She looked at me sharply to make sure I was sincere. She gave me a quick nod. Then she looked out the window again and said, "Uh-oh." Danny Prideaux had pulled up in his 1991 Chrysler LeBaron, a machine he found only slightly less fascinating than he found Kennedy Keys. Danny had parked right at the edge of the crowd, and he hopped out and began to hurry toward the bar. I just knew he was coming to check on Kennedy. Either they'd had a police band radio on at the home builder's supply place, or Danny had heard the news from a customer. The jungle drums beat fast and furious in Bonton. Danny was wearing a gray tank top and jeans and boots, and his broad olive shoulders were gleaming with sweat. As he strode toward the door, I said, "I think my mouth is watering." Kennedy put her hand over her mouth to stifle a yip of laughter. "Yeah, he looks pretty good," she said, trying to sound offhand. We both laughed. But then, disaster struck. One of the protesters, angry at being shooed away from Merlotte's, brought his sign down on the hood of the LeBaron. At the sound, Danny turned around. He froze for a second, and then he was heading at top speed toward the sinner who'd marred the paint job on his car. "Oh no!" Kennedy said, and hurtled out of the bar as if she'd been fired from a slingshot. "Danny!" she yelled. "Danny, you stop!" Danny hesitated, turning his head just a fraction to see who was calling him. With a leap that would have done a kangaroo proud, Kennedy was beside him and wrapping her arms around him. He made an impatient movement, as if to shake her off, and then it seemed to dawn on him that Kennedy, whom he'd spent hours admiring, was embracing him. He stood stiffly, his arms at his side, apparently afraid to move. I couldn't tell what Kennedy was saying to him, but Danny looked down at her face, completely focused on her. One of the demonstrators had forgotten herself enough to get an awe expression on her face, but she snapped out of her lapse into humanity and brandished her sign again.
"Animals go, people stay. We want Congress to show the way."
One of the older demonstrators, a man with a lot of white hair, shouted as I opened the door and stepped out. "Kevin, get them out of here!" I called. Kevin, whose thin, pale face was creased into unhappy lines, was trying to shepherd the little crowd out of the parking lot.
"Mr. Barlow,"
Kevin said to the white-haired man,
"what you're doing is illegal, and I could put you in jail. I really don't want to have to do that." "We're willing to be arrested for our beliefs," the man said. "Isn't that so, you all?"
Some of the church members didn't look entirely certain of that.
"Maybe you are," Kenya said, "but we got Jane Boathouse in one of the cells now. She's coming off a bender, and she's throwing up about every 5 minutes. Believe me, people, you do not want to be in there with Jane." The woman who'd originally come into Merlotte's turned a little green.
"This is private property," Kevin said.
"You cannot demonstrate here. If you don't clear this parking lot in 3 minutes, all of you are under arrest."
It was more like 5 minutes, but the parking lot was clear of demonstrators when Sam joined us in the parking lot to thank Kevin and Kenya. Since I hadn't seen his truck drive up, his appearance was quite a surprise. "When did you get back?" I asked.
"Less than 10 minutes ago," he said. "I knew if I showed myself they'd just get pumped up again, so I parked on School Street and walked through the back way."
"Smart," I said. The lunch crowd was leaving Merlotte's, and the incident was already on the track to becoming a local legend. Only 1 or 2 of the patrons seemed upset. The rest regarded the demonstration as good entertainment. Catfish Hennessy clapped Sam on the shoulder as he went by, and he wasn't the only one who made an extra effort to show support. I wondered how long the tolerant attitude would last. If the picketers kept it up, a lot of people might decide that coming here simply wasn't worth the trouble. I didn't need to say any of this out loud. It was written on Sam's face. "Hey," I said, slinging an arm around his shoulders. "They'll go away. You know what you should do? You should call the pastor of that church. They're all from Holy Word Tabernacle in Clarice. You should tell them that you want to come talk to the church. Show them you're a person, just like everyone else. I bet that would work." Then I realized how stiff his shoulders were. Sam was rigid with anger.
I should not have to tell anyone anything, he said. I'm a citizen of this country. My father was in the army. I was in the army. I pay my share of taxes. And I'm not a person like everyone else. I'm a shifter. And they need to just put that on their plates and eat it.
He whirled to go back into his bar. I flinched, though I knew his anger wasn't directed at me. As I watched Sam stalk away, I reminded myself that none of this was about me. But I couldn't help but feel I had a stake in the outcome of this new development. Not only did I work at Merlotte's, but the woman who'd come in initially had named me as part of the problem. Furthermore, I still thought approaching the church in person was a good idea. It was reasonable and civil. Sam wasn't in a reasonable and civil mood, and I could understand that. I just didn't know where he was going to put his anger. A newspaper reporter came in an hour later and interviewed all of us about the incident, as he called it. Errol Clayton was a guy in his 40s who wrote about half the stories in the little Bon Ton paper. He didn't own it, but he managed it on a shoestring budget. I had no issue with the paper, but of course lots of folks made fun of it. The Bon Ton Bugle was frequently called the Bon Ton Bungle. While Errol was waiting for Sam to finish a phone call, I said, "You want a drink, Mr. Clayton?"
I'd sure appreciate some iced tea, Sookie, he said. How's that brother of yours?
He's doing well.
Getting over the death of his wife?
I think he's come to terms with it, I said, which covered all sorts of ground. That was a terrible thing.
Yes, very bad. And it was right here in this parking lot, Errol Clayton said, as if I might have forgotten. And right here in this parking lot was where the body of Lafayette Reynolds was found.
That's true, too. But of course, none of that was Sam's fault, or had anything to do with him.
Never arrested anyone for Crystal's death that I recall.
I reared back to give Errol Clayton a hard stare. Mr. Clayton, if you've come here to make trouble, you can just leave now. We need things to be better, not worse. Sam is a good man. He goes to the Rotary. He puts an ad in the high school yearbook. He sponsors a baseball team at the Boys and Girls Club every spring, and he helps with the 4th of July fireworks. Plus, he's a great boss, a veteran, and a tax-paying citizen.
Merlotte, you've got a fan club,
Errol Clayton said to Sam, who'd come to stand right behind me.
I've got a friend,
Sam said quietly.
I'm lucky enough to have a lot of friends and a good business. I sure would hate to see that ruined.
I heard an apology in his voice, and I felt his hand pat my shoulder. Feeling much better, I slipped away to do my job, leaving Sam to talk to the newspaper man. I didn't get a chance to talk to my boss again before I left to go home. I had to stop at the store because I needed a couple of things. Claude had made inroads into my potato chip stash and my cereal, too. And I wasn't just imagining that the store was full of people who were busy talking about what had happened at lunchtime at Merlotte's. There was silence every time I came around a corner, but of course that didn't make any difference to me. I could tell what people were thinking. Most of them didn't share the beliefs of the demonstrators, but the mere fact of the incident had set some of the previously indifferent townspeople to thinking about the issue of the two-natured, and about the legislation that proposed to take away some of their rights. And some of them were all for it. Chapter 13. Jason was on time, and I climbed up into his truck. I changed into blue jeans and a pale blue thin t-shirt I'd bought at Old Navy. It said peace in golden Gothic letters. I hoped I didn't look like I was hinting. Jason, in an ever-appropriate New Orleans Saints t-shirt, looked ready for anything. "Hey, Sook!" He was buzzing with happy anticipation. He'd never been to a WARE meeting, of course, and he wasn't aware of how dangerous they could be. Or maybe he was, and that was why he was so excited. "Jason, I gotta tell you a few things about WARE gatherings," I said. "Okay," he said, a bit more soberly. Aware that I sounded more like his know-it-all older sister instead of his younger sister, I gave him a little lecture. I told Jason that the Wares were touchy, proud, and protocol-minded, explained how the Wares could abjure a pack member, emphasized the fact that Basim was a newer pack member who'd been trusted with a position of great responsibility, that he'd betrayed that trust would make the pack even touchier, and they might question Alcide's judgment in picking Basim as enforcer. He might even be challenged. The pack judgment on Annabelle was impossible to predict. Something pretty awful may happen to her, I warned Jason. We gotta suck it up and accept it. You're saying they might physically punish a woman because she cheated on the pack leader with another pack officer? Jason said. Sookie, you're talking to me like I'm not two-natured too. You think I don't know all that? He was right. That was exactly how I'd been treating him. I took a deep breath. I apologize, Jason. I still think about you as my human brother. I don't always remember that you're a lot more. In all honesty, I'm scared. I've seen them kill people before, like I've seen your panthers kill and maim people when they thought that was justice. What scares me is not that you do it, which is bad enough, but that I've come to accept it as just the way you do things if you're two-natured. When those demonstrators were at the bar today, I was so mad at them for hating wares and shifters without really knowing anything about them. But now I'm wondering how they'd feel if they actually knew more about how packs work. How Gran would feel if she knew I was willing to watch a woman, or anyone, be beaten and maybe killed for an infraction of some rules I don't live by. Jason was silent for what seemed like a long time. I think the fact that a few days have passed is a good thing. It's given Alcide time to cool off. I hope the other pack members have had time to think too, he said finally. And I knew that was all we could say about this, and maybe more than I should have said. We fell silent for a short time. Can't you listen in to what they're thinking? Jason asked. Full wares are pretty hard to read. Some are harder than others. Of course, I'll see what I can get. I can block a lot when I make myself, but if I let my guard down... I shrugged. This is a case where I want to know everything I can as soon as I can. Who do you think killed that dude in the grave? I've given it some thought, I said gently. I see 3 main possibilities, but the key to me suspecting all 3 is that he was buried on my land, and I have to assume that wasn't by chance. Jason nodded. Okay, here goes. Maybe Victor, the new vamp leader of Louisiana, killed Basim. Victor wants to knock Eric out of his position since Eric's a sheriff. That's a pretty important position. Jason looked at me like I was an idiot. I may not know all their fancy titles and all their little secret handshakes, he said, but I'll know someone in charge when I see him. If you say this Victor outranks Eric and wants him gone, I'll believe you. I had to stop underestimating my brother's shrewdness. Maybe Victor thought that if I got arrested for murder, since someone tipped off the law that there was a body on my land, Eric would go down with me. Maybe Victor thought that would be enough for their mutual boss to take Eric out of his position. Wouldn't it have been better to put the body in Eric's house and call the police? That's a good point, but finding a body in Eric's house would mean bad press for all vampires. Another idea I had, maybe the killer was Annabelle, who was screwing both Basim and Alcide. Maybe she got jealous, or maybe Basim said he was going to tell, so she killed him, and since they'd just been on my land, she thought of it as a good place to bury a body. That's a long way to drive with a body in the trunk, Jason said. He was clearly going to play devil's advocate. Sure, it's easy to punch holes in all my ideas, I said, sounding exactly like his little sister, once I go to all the work of coming up with them. But you're right. That'd be a risk I wouldn't want to take, I added on a more mature level. Alcide could have done it, Jason said. Yeah, he could have. But you were there. Did it seem to you, remotely, like he knew it was going to be Basim? No, he said. I thought he got a huge shock, but I wasn't looking at Annabelle. I wasn't either, so I don't know how she reacted. So you got any other ideas? Yeah, I said, and this is my least favorite. You know I told you that Heidi the vampire scented fairies in the woods? I did too, Jason said. Maybe I should get you to check out the woods on a regular basis, I said. Anyway, Claude said it wasn't him, and Heidi confirmed that. But what if Basim saw Claude meeting with another fairy? In the area around the house where Claude's scent would be natural. When would this have happened? The night the pack was on the property? Claude hadn't moved in then, but he'd come around to see me. I could see Jason trying to figure out the sequence. So, Basim warned you about the fairies he tracked, but he didn't tell you he'd seen some? I don't think that holds together, Sook. You're right, I admitted. And we still don't know who the other fairy would be. If there are two, and one of them isn't Claude, and the other one is Dermot, that leaves one fairy we don't know about. Dermot's seriously messed up, Jason, Jason said. I'm worried about all of them. Even Claude? Look, how come he showed up now, when you have other fairies in the woods? And does that sound crazy when you say it out loud or what? I laughed, just a little. Yeah, it sounds nuts. And I get your point. I don't entirely trust Claude, even if he is a little bit family. I wish I hadn't said yes to him moving in. On the other hand, I don't believe he means to hurt me or you, and he's not quite as much of an asshole as I thought he was. We tried to put together a few more theories about Basim's death, but we could punch too many holes in all of our theories. It passed the time until we arrived. The house Alcide had moved into when his dad died was a large 2-story brick home on large grounds, enhanced with impressive landscaping. The estate? Manor house? Was in a very nice area of Shreveport, of course. In fact, it wasn't too far from Eric's neighborhood. That gnawed at me, thinking of Eric so close to me but in so much trouble. The confusion of what I was feeling through our blood bond was making me more jittery with every passing night. There were so many people sharing in that bond now, so much feeling going back and forth. It wore me out emotionally. Alexei was the worst. He was a very dead little boy. That was the only way I could put it. A child locked in a permanent grayness. A child who experienced only occasional flashes of pleasure and color in his new life. After days of experiencing what amounted to an echo of him living in my head, I'd decided the boy was like a tick, sucking on the life of Appius Livius, Eric, and now me. He siphoned off a little every day. Apparently, Appius Livius was so used to Alexei's draining him that he accepted it as part of his existence. Maybe, possibly, the Roman felt responsible for the trouble Alexei caused, since he'd brought him over. If that was Appius Livius's conviction, I thought he was absolutely correct. I was sure that bringing Alexei to Eric, thinking the presence of another child would soothe Alexei's psychosis, was a last-ditch effort to cure the boy. And Eric, my lover, was caught in the middle of all this, along with all the problems he was staving off involving Victor. I felt less and less like a good person every day. As we walked from the driveway to Alcide's front door, I admitted to myself that since my visit to Fantasia, I found myself wishing that all of them would die. Appius Livius, Alexei, Victor. I had to shove all that into a mental corner because I had to be on my game to enter a house full of wares. Jason put his arm around my shoulders and gave me a half hug. Sometime you'll have to explain to me how come we're doing this, he said, because I think I kind of forgot. I laughed, which was what he'd wanted. I put up a hand to ring the bell, but the door swung open before my fingertip made contact. Janelyn was standing there in a sports bra and running shorts. She always came up with wardrobe choices that startled me. The running shorts showed concave dips by her hip bones, and I sighed. Concave was not a word I'd ever used in relation to my body. Getting into the new job? Jason asked her, stepping forward. Janelyn had to either back up or block his way, and she chose to back up. I was born for this job, the young ware said. I had to agree. Janelyn seemed to love doling out violence. At the same time, I wondered what job she could hold in the real world. She'd been bartending at a Ware-owned bar in Shreveport when I'd first seen her, and I knew the owner of that bar had died in the struggle between the packs. Where are you working now, Janelyn? I asked, since there shouldn't be any need to keep that secret that I could see. I managed the hair of the dog. The ownership passed to Alcide, and he felt I could handle the job. I have some help, she said, which was a confession that surprised me. Ham, his arm around a pretty brunette in a sundress, was waiting across the foyer by the open doors to the living room. He patted my shoulder and introduced his companion as Patricia Crimmins. I recognized her as one of the women who joined the Longtooth Pack in surrender after the Ware War, and I tried to focus on her, but my attention kept straying. Patricia laughed and said, "It's quite a place, isn't it?" I nodded in silent agreement. I'd never been in the house before, and my eyes were drawn to the French doors on the other side of the big room. There were lights out in the large backyard, which not only was enclosed by a fence that had to be 7 feet tall, but was also lined outside with those quick-growing cypresses that shoot up like spears. In the middle of the patio was a fountain, which would make getting a drink easy if you turned into a wolf. There was a lot of wrought iron furniture set around on the flagstones, too. Wow, I'd known the Herveaux were well-to-do, but this was impressive. The living room itself was very men's club, all glossy dark leather and paneling, and the fireplace was as big as fireplaces got in this day and age. There were animal heads mounted on the walls, which I thought was kind of amusing. Everyone seemed to have a drink in hand, and I located the bar at the center of the thickest cluster of wares. I didn't spot Alcide, who, because of his height and his presence, was usually a standout in any crowd. I spotted Annabelle. She was in the center of the room on her knees, though she was not constrained in any way. There was an empty space all around her.
"Don't approach,"
Ham said quietly as I took a step forward. I stopped in my tracks.
"You can talk to her later, probably,"
Patricia whispered. It was the probably that bothered me. But this was pack business, and I was on pack land.
"I'm getting me a beer,"
Jason said after he'd had a good look at Annabelle's situation.
"What do you want, Sup?"
"You need to go upstairs," Janelyn said very quietly. "Don't drink anything else. Alcide's got a drink for you." She jerked her head toward the stairs to my left. I puckered my brows together, and Jason looked as though he were going to protest, but she jerked her head again. I found Alcide in a study at the head of the stairs. He was looking out the window. There was a glass of cloudy yellow liquid sitting on the desk blotter. "What?" I said. I was getting an even worse feeling about this evening than I'd already had. He turned to face me. His black hair was still in a tumble, and he could have used a shave, but grooming had nothing to do with the charisma that surrounded him like a cocoon. I didn't know if the role had enhanced the man, or if the man had grown into the role, but Alcide had come far from the charming, friendly guy I'd met 2 winters ago.
"We don't have a shaman anymore,"
he said with no preamble.
"We haven't had one for 4 years. It's hard to find a Ware who's willing to take the position, and you have to have the talent for it to even consider it anyway."
"Okay," I said, waiting to see where he was going.
"You're the closest we've got."
If there'd been drums in the background, they would have started an ominous roll. "I'm not a shaman," I said. "In fact, I don't know what a shaman is, and you don't have me."
"That's a term we use for a medicine man or woman," Alcide said. "One with a gift for interpreting and applying magic. It sounded better to us than witch, and this way we know who we're talking about. If we had a pack shaman, that shaman would drink the stuff in this glass and be able to help us determine the truth of what happened to Basim and the degree of guilt of everyone involved. Then the pack would decide on proportionate justice."
"What is it?" I asked, pointing at the liquid.
"It's what was left over in the last shaman's stash."
"What is it?"
"It's a drug," he said. "But before you walk out, let me tell you that the last shaman took it several times without any lasting ill effect."
"Lasting?"
"Well, he had stomach cramps the next day, but he was able to go back to work the day after that."
"Of course, he was aware, and he'd be able to eat things I can't eat anyway. What does it do to you? Or rather, what would it do to me?"
"It gives you a different perception of reality. That's what the guy told me. And since I clearly wasn't shaman material, that's all he told me."
"Why would I take an unknown drug?" I asked, genuinely curious.
"Because otherwise we'll never get to the bottom of this," Alcide said. "Right now, the only guilty person I can see is Annabelle. She may only be guilty of being unfaithful to me. I hate that, but she doesn't deserve to die for it." But if I can't find out who killed Basim and planted him in your ground, I think the pack will condemn her, since she's the only one who was involved with him. I guess I'd be a good suspect for killing Basim out of jealousy, but I could have done it legally, and I wouldn't have blamed you.
I knew that was true.
They'll put her to death,
he said, harping on the point that would have the most effect on me. I was almost tough enough to shrug. Almost. Can't I try to do this my way? I said, laying my hands on them.
You've told me yourself it's hard to get a clear thought from Wares.
Alcide said it almost sadly.
Sookie, I'd hoped we'd be a couple one day. Now that I'm pack master and you're in love with that cold-ass Eric, I guess that'll never happen. I thought we might have a chance because you couldn't read my thoughts that clearly. Since I know that, I don't think I can rely on you laying on your hands and getting an accurate reading.
He was right. A year ago, I said, you wouldn't have asked this of me.
A year ago, he answered, you wouldn't have hesitated to drink.
I crossed to the desk and tossed it down. Chapter 14. I went down the stairs on Alcide's arm. I was already feeling a little swimmy in the head, having taken an illegal drug for the first time in my life. I was an idiot. However, I was an increasingly warm and comfortable idiot. A delightful side effect of the shaman's drink was that I couldn't feel Eric and Alexei and Appius Livius with nearly as much immediacy, and the relief was incredible. A less pleasant side effect was that my legs didn't feel quite real underneath me. Maybe that was why Alcide was keeping such a tight grip on my arm. I remembered what he'd said about his former hope that we'd be a couple one day, and I thought it might be nice to kiss him and remind myself what it felt like. Then I realized I'd better channel those warm and fuzzy feelings into finding out the answers to the puzzles facing Alcide. I directed my feelings, which was an excellent decision. I was so proud of my excellence, I could have rolled in it. The shaman had probably known a few tricks for keeping all this dreaminess focused on the matter at hand. I made a huge effort to sharpen up. In my absence, the group in the living room had swollen in numbers. The whole pack was here. I could feel the totality of it, the completeness. Eyes turned to look at us as we descended the stairs. Jason looked alarmed, but I gave him a reassuring smile. Something must have been off about it, because his face didn't smooth out. Alcide's second went to stand by the kneeling Annabelle. Janelyn threw back her head and gave a series of yips. Now I was standing by my brother, and he was holding on to me. Somehow, Alcide had passed me over to Jason's keeping.
Jeez, Jason muttered. What's wrong with waving your hand in the air or ringing a triangle?
I could assume yipping was not a summons in the Panther Pride. That was okay. I smiled at Jason. I felt a lot like Alice in Wonderland after she took a bite of the mushroom. I was on one side of the empty space around Annabelle, Alcide on the other. He looked around to collect the pack's attention.
We're here tonight with 2 visitors to decide what to do about Annabelle,
he said without a preamble.
We're here to judge whether she had anything to do with the death of Basim, or if that death can be laid at the door of anyone else.
Why are there visitors? Asked a woman's voice. I tried to find her face, but she was standing so far in the back I couldn't see her. I estimated there were perhaps as many as 40 people in the room, ranging in age from 16, the change began after puberty, to 70. Ham and Patricia were to my left, about a quarter of the circle away. Janelyn had stayed by Annabelle. The few other pack members I knew by name were scattered through the crowd.
Listen hard,
Alcide said, looking directly at me. Okay, Alcide, message received. I closed my eyes, and I listened. Well, this was abso-fucking-lutely amazing.
I found I knew when his gaze swept the assembled pack members by the ripple of fear that followed. I could see the fear. It was dark yellow.
Basim's body was found on Suki's land,
Alcide said.
It was planted there in an attempt to blame her for his death. The police came to search for it right after we removed it.
There was a general surge of surprise from almost everyone. You moved the body? Patricia said. My eyes flew open. Why had Alcide elected to keep that a secret? Because it had been a total shock to Patricia and to a few others that Basim's body was not still in the clearing. Jason moved up behind me and put his beer down. He knew he needed his hands free. My brother might not be a mental giant, but he had good instincts. I was amazed at Alcide's cleverness in setting up the scene. I might not get Ware thoughts that clearly, but Ware emotions, that was what he was after. Now that I was concentrating, focusing on the creatures in the room, almost out of my body with the intensity of it, I saw Alcide as a ball of red energy, pulsing and attractive, and all the other Wares were circling around him. I understood for the first time that the pack leader was the planet around which all others orbited in the Ware universe. The pack members were various shades of red and violet and pink, the colors of their devotion to him. Janelyn was a blazing streak of intense crimson, her adoration making her almost as bright as Alcide himself. Even Annabelle was a watery cerise, despite her infidelity. But there were a few spots of green. I held my hand out in front of me, as if I were telling the rest of the world to stop while I considered this new interpretation of perception.
Tonight, Suki is our shaman.
Alcide's voice boomed from a distance. I could safely ignore that. I could follow the colors, because they betrayed the person. Green. Look for the green. Though my head remained still and my eyes closed, I turned them somehow to look at the green people. Ham was green. Patricia was green. I looked the other way. There was one more green one, but he fluctuated between pale yellow and faint green. Ha! Ambivalent, I told myself wisely. Not a traitor yet, but doubtful about Alcide's leadership. The wavering image belonged to a young male, and I dismissed him as insignificant. I looked at Annabelle again, cerise still, but flickering with amber as her intense fear broke through her loyalty. I opened my eyes. What was I supposed to say? They're green, get them? I found myself moving, drifting through the pack like a balloon through the trees. Finally, I was right in front of Ham and Patricia. This was where the hands would come in handy. Ha! That was funny. I laughed a little.
Suki?
Ham said. Patricia shrank back, letting go of him. Don't go anywhere, Patricia, I said, smiling at her. She flinched, ready to run, but a dozen hands grabbed her and held her firmly. I looked up at Ham and put my fingers on his cheeks. If I'd had some finger paint, he'd have looked like a movie Indian on the warpath. So jealous, I said. Ham? You told Alcide there were people camping on the stream, and that was why the pack needed to run in my woods. You invited those men, didn't you?
No!
Oh, I see, I said, touching the tip of his nose. I see. I could hear his thoughts as clearly as if I were inside his head now. So they were from the government. They were trying to gather information on the werepacks in Louisiana and anything bad the packs might have done. They asked you to bribe an enforcer, a second, to describe all the bad stuff he'd done, so they could push through that bill, the one that'll require you all to register like aliens. Hamilton Bond, shame on you! You told them to force Basim to tell them stuff, the stuff that had gotten him kicked out of the Houston pack.
None of this is true, Alcide,
Ham said. He was trying to sound all big, serious man, but to me he sounded like a squeaky little mouse.
Alcide, I've known you my whole life.
And you thought that Alcide would make you his second, I said. Instead, he picked Basim, who already had a track record as an enforcer.
He got thrown out of Houston, Ham said. That's how bad he was.
The anger broke through, pulsing in gold and black. I'd ask him, and I'd know the truth, but I can't right now, right? Because you killed him and put him in the cold, cold ground. Actually, it hadn't been all that cold, but I felt I was due a little artistic license. My mind soared and swooped way above everything. I could see so much. I felt like God. This was fun.
I didn't kill Basim. Well, maybe I did, but it was because he was screwing our pack leader's girlfriend. I couldn't stomach such disloyalty.
Beep, try again. I fanned my fingers over his cheeks. We needed to know something else, didn't we? Some other question had to be answered.
He met with a creature in your woods on our moon night, Ham blurted. I don't know what he talked about.
What kind of creature?
I don't know. Some guy. I've never seen anything like him. He was really handsome, like a movie star or something. He had long hair, really pale, long hair, and he was there 1 minute and gone the next. He talked to Basim while Basim was in his wolf form. Basim was by himself. After we ate the deer, I'd fallen asleep on the other side of some laurel bushes. When I woke up, I heard them talking. The other guy was trying to frame you for something because you'd done something to him. I don't know what. Basim was going to kill someone and bury him on your land and then call the cops. That would take care of you and then the fair.
Ham's voice died away. You knew it was a fairy, I said, smiling at Ham. You knew. So you decided to do the job first.
It wasn't something Alcide would have wanted Basim to do, right, Alcide?
Alcide didn't answer, but he was pulsating like a skyrocket on the periphery of my vision. And you told Patricia, and she helped, I said, stroking his face. He wanted to make me stop, but he didn't dare.
Her sister died in the war. She couldn't accept her new pack. I was the only one who was nice to her, she said.
Ah, you're so generous to be nice to the pretty werewoman, I said mockingly. Good, Ham. Instead of Basim killing someone and burying them, you killed Basim and buried him. Instead of Basim getting a reward from the fairy, you thought you would get a reward from the fairy, because fairies are rich, right? I let my nails dig into his cheek. Basim wanted the money to get out from under the government, guys. You wanted the money just because you wanted the money.
Basim owed a blood debt in Houston, Ham said. Basim wouldn't have talked to the anti-wear people for any reason. I can't go to my death with that lie on my soul. Basim wanted to pay off the debt he owed for killing a human who was a friend of the pack. It was an accident while Basim was in wolf form. The human poked him with a hoe, and Basim killed him.
I knew about that, Alcide said. He hadn't spoken until now.
I told Basim I would loan him the money. I guess he wanted to earn it himself,
Ham said miserably. Misery, I learned, was deep purple.
He thought he'd meet with the fairy again, find out exactly what the fairy wanted him to do, get a body from a mortuary or a drunk's body from some alley and plant it on Sookie's land. That would fulfill the letter of what the fairy wanted. No harm would have been done. But instead, I decided...
He began sobbing, and his color turned all washed-out gray, the color of faded faith. Where were you going to meet him? I asked. To get your money, which you had earned. I'm not saying you didn't. I was proud of how fair I was being. Fairness was blue, of course.
I was going to meet him at the same spot in your woods, he said, on the south side by the cemetery, later tonight.
Very good, I murmured. Don't you feel better now?
Yes,
he said, without a trace of irony in his voice.
I do feel better, and I'm ready to accept the judgment of the pack. I'm not, Patricia cried. I escaped death in the pack war by surrendering. Let me surrender again.
She fell to her knees like Annabelle.
I beg forgiveness. I'm only guilty of loving the wrong man.
Like Annabelle.
Patricia bowed her head, and her dark braid fell over one shoulder. She put her clasped hands to her face, pretty as a picture.
You didn't love me?
Ham said, genuinely shocked.
We screwed. You were upset with Alcide because he didn't pick you to bat. I was upset with Alcide because he didn't pick me as his second. That was the sum total of what we had in common.
Their colors are certainly getting brighter now, I observed. The passion of their mutual accusation was perking up their auras to something combustible. I tried to summarize to myself what I'd learned, but it all came out a jumble. Maybe Jason could help me sort it out later. This shaman stuff was kind of taxing. I felt that soon I would be depleted, as if the end of a race were in sight. Time to decide, I said, looking at Alcide, whose brilliant red glow was still steady.
I think Annabelle should be disciplined but not cast out of the pack,
Alcide said, and there was a chorus of protest.
Kill her,
said Janelin, her fierce little face determined. She was so ready to do the killing. I wondered if Sam really understood what he'd bitten off in going out with such a ferocious thing. He seemed so far away now.
This is my reasoning,
Alcide said calmly. The room quieted as the pack listened.
According to them,
and he pointed at Ham and Patricia,
Annabelle's only guilt is a moral one, sleeping with two men at the same time while telling one of them she was faithful. We don't know what she told Valcine.
Alcide spoke the truth, at least the truth as he saw it. I looked at Annabelle and saw her all. The disciplined woman who was in the Air Force, the practical woman who balanced her pack life with the rest of her life, the woman who lost all her practicality and restraint when it came to sex. Annabelle was a rainbow of colors right now, none of them happy except the vibrating white line of relief that Alcide did not plan to kill her.
As for Ham and Patricia, Ham is the murderer of a pack member. Instead of an open challenge, he took the path of stealth. That would call for severe punishment, maybe death. We should consider that Basim was a traitor, not only a pack member, but a second, who was willing to deal with someone outside the pack, to plot against the pack interests and against the good name of a friend of the pack, Alcide continued.
Oh, I murmured to Jason, that's me.
And Patricia, who promised to be loyal to this pack, broke her vow, Alcide said, so she should be cast out forever.
Packmaster, you're too merciful, Janelin said vehemently. Ham clearly deserves death for his disloyalty. Ham, at least. There was a long silence, broken by a growing buzz of discussion. I looked around the room, seeing the color of thoughtfulness, brown, of course, turning into all kinds of shades as passions rose. Jason put his arms around me from behind.
You need to back out of this,
he whispered, and I could see his words turn pink and curly. He loved me. I put a hand over my mouth so I wouldn't laugh out loud. We stepped backward. 1 step, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we were standing in the foyer.
We need to leave, Jason said. If they're gonna kill two good-looking gals like Annabelle and Patricia, I don't want to be around to see it. If we don't see anything, we won't have to testify in court if it comes to that.
They won't debate long. I think Annabelle will see tomorrow. Alcide will let Janelin persuade him to kill Ham and Patricia, I said. His colors tell me so. Jason gaped at me.
I don't know what you took or smoked or inhaled upstairs, he said, but you need to get out of here now.
Okay, I said, and suddenly I realized I felt pretty damn bad. I made it outside to Alcide's shrubbery before I threw up. I waited for the second wave to roll over me before I risked getting into Jason's truck. What would Gran say about me leaving before I saw the results of what I'd done? I asked him sadly. I left after the Were War when Alcide was celebrating his victory.
I don't know how you Panthers celebrate, but believe me, I didn't want to be around when he fucked one of the wares. It was bad enough seeing Janelin execute the wounded. On the other hand, I lost my train of thought in another wave of sickness, though this one wasn't as violent.
Gran would say you're not obliged to watch people kill each other, and you didn't cause it, they did,
Jason said briskly. I could tell that my brother, though sympathetic, wasn't thrilled about driving me all the way home with my stomach so jittery.
Listen, can I just drop you by Eric's? He said. I know he's got to have a bathroom or two, and that way my truck can stay clean.
Under any other circumstances, I would have refused, since Eric was in such a charged situation. But I felt shaky, and I was still seeing colors. I chewed 2 antacids from the glove compartment and rinsed my mouth out repeatedly with some Sprite Jason had in the truck. I had to agree that it would be better if I could spend the night in Shreveport.
I can come back and get you in the morning, Jason offered. Or maybe his day guy can give you a ride to Bonton.
Bobby Burnham would rather transport a flock of turkeys. While I hesitated, I discovered that now that I wasn't surrounded by wares, I felt the misery rolling through the blood bond. It was the strongest, most active emotion I'd felt from Eric in days. The misery began to swell as unhappiness and physical pain overwhelmed him. Jason opened his mouth to ask questions about what I'd taken before the pack meeting.
Get me to Eric's, I said. Quick, Jason, something's wrong. There, too,
he said plaintively, but we roared out of Alcide's driveway. I was practically shaking with anxiety when we stopped at the gate so Dan, the security guard, could give me a look. He hadn't recognized Jason's truck.
I'm here to see Eric, and this is my brother,
I said, trying to act normal.
Go on through,
Dan said, smiling. It's been a while. When we pulled into Eric's driveway, I saw that his garage door was open, though the garage light was off. In fact, the house was in total darkness. Maybe everyone was over at Fantasia. Nope, I knew Eric was there. I simply knew it.
I don't like this,
I said, and sat up a little straighter. I struggled against the effects of the drug. Though I was a little closer to normal since I'd been sick, I still felt as though I were experiencing the world through gauze.
He don't leave it open?
Jason peered out over his steering wheel.
No, he never leaves it open. And look, the kitchen door is open too.
I got out of the truck, and I heard Jason get out on his side. His truck light stayed on automatically for a few seconds, so I got to the kitchen door easily enough. I always knocked at Eric's door if he didn't expect me, because I never knew who would be there or what they'd be talking about. But this time, I simply pushed the door even wider. I could see a short distance into the kitchen because of the truck lights. The wrongness rolled out in a cloud, that feeling a mixture of the sense I'd been born with and the extra layer of senses the drug had imparted. I was glad Jason was right behind me. I could hear his breathing, way too fast and noisy.
Eric?
I said very quietly. No one answered. There was no sound of any kind. I stepped into the kitchen just as Jason's truck lights went off. There were street lights out on the street, and they supplied a dim glow.
Eric?
I called.
Where are you?
Tension made my voice crack. Something was awfully wrong.
In here,
he said from farther in the house, and my heart clenched.
Thank you, God,
I said, and my hand went out to the wall switch. I flicked it down, flooding the room with light. I looked around. The kitchen was pristine as always, so the awful things hadn't happened here. I crept from the kitchen into Eric's big living room. I knew immediately that someone had died here. There were bloodstains everywhere. Some of them were still wet. Some of them dripped. I heard Jason's breath catch in his throat. Eric was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. There was no one else alive in the room. Though the smell of blood was almost choking me, I was by him in a second.
Honey,
I said, look at me. When he raised his head, I could see a terrible gash across his forehead. He'd bled copiously from the head wound. There was dried blood all over his face. When he straightened,
I could see the blood on his white shirt. The head wound was healing, but the other one...
What's under the shirt? I said.
My ribs are broken and they've come through, he said. They'll heal, but it'll take time. You'll have to push them back into place.
Tell me what's happened, I said, trying very hard to sound calm. Of course, he knew I wasn't.
Dead guy over here, Jason called. Human.
Who is it, Eric? I eased his bare feet up onto the sofa so he could lie down.
It's Bobby, he said. I tried to get him out of here in time, but he was so sure there was something he could do to help me.
Eric sounded incredibly tired. Who killed him? I hadn't even scanned for other beings in this house, and I almost gasped at my own carelessness.
Alexei snapped, Eric said. Tonight he left his room when Okela came in here to talk to me. I knew Bobby was still in the house, but I simply didn't think about his being in danger. Felicia was here too, and Pam.
Why was Felicia here? I asked, because Eric didn't ask his staff to his house as a rule. Felicia, the Fantasia bartender, had been lowest on the vampire totem pole.
She was dating Bobby. He had some papers I needed to sign, and she'd just come over with him.
So Felicia...
Part of a vampire left over here, Jason called. Looks like the rest is flaked away.
She's gone to her final death,
Eric told me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I put my arms around him, and after a second, his shoulders relaxed. I had never seen Eric so defeated. Even the awful night we'd been surrounded by the vampires of Las Vegas and forced to surrender to Victor, the night he thought we might all die. He'd had that spark of determination and vigor, but at the moment, he was literally overwhelmed with depression and anger and helplessness. Thanks to his damn maker, whose ego had required he'd bring back a traumatized boy from the dead. Where's Alexei now? I asked, making my voice as brisk as I could manage. Where's Appius? Is he still alive? To hell with the two-name requirement. I thought it would be great if Alexei had been helpful enough to kill the old vampire, save me the trouble.
I don't know.
Eric sounded completely defeated. Why not? I was genuinely shocked. He's your maker, buddy. You'd know if he died. If I've been feeling you three for a week, I know you've been feeling him even stronger. Judith had said she'd felt a tug the day of Lorena's death, though she hadn't understood what it meant. Eric had been alive for so long, maybe it would actually cause him physical harm if Appius died. In a snap, I completely reversed my thinking. Appius should live until Eric recovered from his wounds. You need to get out of here and go find him!
He asked me not to follow when he went after Alexei. He doesn't want us all to die.
So you're just gonna sit home because he said so? When you don't know where they are or what they're doing or who they're doing it to? I didn't know what I wanted Eric to actually do. The drug was still coasting through my system, though it was slightly weaker. I was only seeing colors where they shouldn't be every now and then. But I had very little control over my thoughts and my speech. I was simply trying to get Eric to act like Eric, and I wanted him to stop bleeding, and I wanted Jason to come push Eric's bones back in because I could see them sticking out.
Okela asked this of me,
Eric said, and he glared at me. So he asked? That doesn't sound like a direct order to me. It sounds like a request. Correct me if I'm wrong, I said, as snarkily as I could.
No,
Eric said through clenched teeth. I could feel his anger rising.
It was not a direct order.
Jason! I yelled. My brother appeared, looking very grim. Please push Eric's ribs back in, I said, which is another sentence I never thought I'd hear myself saying. Without a word, but with a hard-set mouth, Jason put his hands on each side of the gaping wound. He looked at Eric's nose and said, "Ready?" Without waiting for an answer, he pushed in. Eric made an awful noise, but I noticed the bleeding stopped and the healing began. Jason looked down at his reddened hands and went to find a bathroom. Well then, I said, handing Eric an open bottle of True Blood that had been left on the coffee table. He made a face, but gulped it down. What are you gonna do?
Later on, we'll have words about this,
he said. He gave me a look. Fine with me! I glared right back and went off on an irrational tangent. And while you're listing the things you should be doing, where's the cleaning crew?
Bobby?
He began, and then stopped short. Bobby would have called the cleaning crew for Eric. Okay, how's about I do that part? I said, and wondered where to find a phone book.
He kept a list of important numbers in the right-hand desk drawer in my office,
Eric said, very quietly. I found the name of the vampire cleaning service based midway between Shreveport and Baton Rouge, Fangster Cleanup. Since it was vampire-run, they'd be open. A male answered the phone immediately, and I described the problem.
We'll be there in 3 hours if the homeowner can guarantee us a safe sleeping place in case the job runs over, he said.
No problem. There was no telling where the other 2 resident vampires were, or if they'd survived to return before the dawn. If they did, they could all sleep in Eric's big bed, or in the other light-type bedroom if the coffins were required. I thought there were a couple of the fiberglass pods stashed in the laundry room, too. Now the carpets and furniture would be cleaned. We just had to make sure no one else died tonight. After I hung up, I felt super efficient, but strangely empty, which I attributed to having lost everything that had been in my stomach. Since I was so light, I floated when I walked. Okay, maybe I still had more drug in me than I thought. Then it suddenly hit me. Eric had said that Pam was in the house, too. Where was she? Jason? I yelled. Please, please find Pam. I returned to the foul-smelling living room, marched over to the windows, and opened them. I swung around to face my boyfriend, who, before this night, had been many things. Arrogant, quick-thinking, strong-willed, secretive, and tricky were only the short list. But he'd never been indecisive, and he'd never been hopeless. What's the plan? I asked him. He was looking a little better now that Jason had done his thing. I couldn't see any bones anymore.
There isn't one,
Eric said, but at least he looked guilty about it. What's the plan? I asked again.
I told you. I haven't made a plan. I don't know what to do. Okela may be dead by now, if Alexei was clever enough to waylay him.
Eric's bloody tears ran down his cheeks. Bzzzt! I made the noise of a buzzer going off. You'd know if Appius Livius was dead. He's your maker. What's the plan? Eric shot to his feet, with only a slight wince. Good. I'd goaded him upright.
I haven't got one, he roared. No matter what I do, someone will die.
With no plan, someone's going to die, and you know it. Someone's probably died right this second. Alexei is crazy. Let's have a plan. I threw my hands up in the air.
Why do you smell strange?
He'd finally taken in the peace t-shirt.
You smell of wear and of drugs, and you've been sick.
I've already been through hell tonight, I said, maybe overstating a little bit. And now I get to go through it twice, because someone's got to get your Viking butt on the road.
What am I supposed to do?
He said, in a strangely reasonable voice. So, you're okay with Alexei killing Appius? I mean, I sure am, but I would have thought you would have objected. Guess I was wrong. Jason staggered in.
I found Pam,
he said. He sat down very suddenly on an armchair.
She needed blood.
But she's moving?
Only barely. She's cut, her ribs are kicked in, and her left arm and her right leg are broken.
Oh, God, I said, and dashed back to find her. I definitely hadn't been thinking straight because of the drugs, or she would have been my first priority once I found Eric alive. She'd begun crawling to the living room from the bathroom, where Alexei had evidently trapped her. The knife slashes were the most obvious injury, but Jason had been right about the broken bones, and this was after she'd had Jason's blood.
Don't say anything, she grunted. He caught me unawares.
I am so stupid. How is Eric? He's going to be okay. Can I help you up?
No, she said bitterly. I prefer to drag myself along the hardwood floor.
Bitch, I said, squatting to help her up. It was hard work, but since Jason had donated so much blood to Pam, I hated to ask him for help. We staggered into the living room. Who would have thought Alexei could do so much damage? He's so puny, and you're a great fighter.
Flattery, she said, her voice ragged, is not effective at this point. It was my fault. The little shit was following Bobby around, and I saw he'd gotten a knife from the kitchen. I tried to corner him while Bobby got out of the house, to give O'Kellar a chance to cool the boy down, but he went for me. He's fast as a snake.
I was beginning to doubt I could get Pam to the couch. Eric rose unsteadily and put his arm around her. Between us, we maneuvered her over to the couch he'd vacated.
Do you need my blood? He asked her. I thank you for doing your best to stop him. He's my kin, too, Pam said, settling back on a pillow with relief. Through you, I'm related to that little murderer.
Eric made a gesture with his wrist.
No, you need all your blood if you're going after him. I'm healing.
Since you got a few pints of mine, Jason said weakly, with a ghost of his usual swagger.
It was good. Thank you, Panther,
she said, and I thought my brother smirked a little, but just then, his cell phone rang. I knew the ringtone. It was from a song he loved, Queen's We Are the Champions. Jason extricated the phone from his pocket and opened it.
Hey,
he said, and then he listened.
You okay?
He asked. He listened some more.
Okay. Thanks, honey. You stay inside, lock the doors, and don't answer them until you hear my voice. Wait until you hear my cell phone, okay?
Jason flipped the phone shut.
That was Michelle, he said. Alexei was just at my house looking for me. She went to the door, but when she saw he was a debtor, she didn't ask him in. He told her he wants to warm himself in my life, whatever that means. He tracked me there from your house by my smell.
Jason looked self-conscious, as if he were afraid he'd forgotten to put on deodorant. Did the older one come after him? I asked. I leaned against a handy wall. I was beginning to feel really ragged.
Yeah, within a minute.
What did Michelle tell them?
She told them to go back to your house. She figured if they were vamps, they were some problem of yours.
That was Michelle, all right. My cell was out in Jason's truck. I used his to call my house. Claude answered. What are you doing there? I said.
We're closed on Monday, he said. Why'd you call if you didn't want me to answer?
Claude, there is a very bad vamp headed to the house, and he can come in. He's been there before, I said. You gotta get out. Get in your car and get out! Alexei's psychotic break, plus Claude's fairy allure to vampires, this was a deadly combination. The night, apparently, was still not over. I wondered if it ever would be. For an awful moment, I looked into an endless nightmare of wandering from crisis to crisis, always one step behind. Give me your keys, Jason, I said. You're in no shape to drive after your blood donation, and Eric's still healing. I don't want to drive his car. My brother fished his keys from his pocket and tossed them to me, and I was grateful for someone who didn't argue.
I'm coming,
Eric said, and pushed to his feet once more. Pam had shut her eyes, but they flew open as she realized we were leaving. All right, I said, since I would take any help I could get. Even a weak Eric was stronger than almost anything. I told Jason about the cleanup crew that was coming, and then we were out the door and into the truck, with Pam still protesting that if we loaded her in, she would heal along the way. I drove, and I drove fast. There was no point in asking if Eric could fly so he could get there faster, because I knew he couldn't. Eric and I didn't talk along the way. We had either too much to say or not enough. When we were about 4 minutes away from the house, Eric doubled over with pain. It wasn't his. I got a backwash of it from him. Something big had happened. We were rocketing down the driveway to my house less than 45 minutes after we'd left Shreveport, which was pretty damn good. The security light in my front yard illuminated a strange scene. A pale-haired fairy I'd never seen before was standing back to back with Claude. The one I didn't know had a long, thin sword. Claude had 2 of my longest kitchen knives, one in each hand. Alexei, who appeared to be unarmed, was circling them like a small white killing machine. He was naked and covered in splotches, which were all shades of red.
Okella was lying sprawled on the gravel. His head was covered in dark blood. That seemed to be the theme of the night. We skidded to a stop and scrambled out of Jason's truck. Alexei smiled, so he knew we were there, but he didn't stop his circling.
You didn't bring Jason, he called. I wanted to see him.
He had to give Pam a lot of blood to keep her from dying, I said. He was too weak.
He should have let her pass away,
Alexei called and darted under the sword to give the unknown fairy a hard fist to the stomach. Though Alexei had a knife, he seemed to be feeling playful. The fairy swung the sword faster than I could follow with my eyes, and it nicked Alexei, adding another rivulet to the blood already coursing down his chest.
Can you please stop?
I asked. I staggered because I seemed to have run out of steam. Eric put his arm around me.
No,
Alexei said in his high boy's voice.
Eric's love for you is pouring through our bones, Suki, but I can't stop. This is the best I've felt in decades.
He did feel wonderful. I could feel that coming through the bond. Though the drugs had temporarily deadened it, now I was feeling nuances, and there was such a contradictory bundle of them that it was like standing in a wind that kept changing directions. Eric was trying to ease us over to where his maker lay.
Okella, he said, do you live?
Okella opened one black eye behind a mask of blood. He said,
for the first time in centuries, I think I wish I didn't.
I think I wish you didn't too, I thought, and I felt him glance at me.
She'll kill me with no compunction, that one,
the Roman said, almost sounding amused. In the same voice, he said,
Alexei has severed my spinal cord, and until it heals, I will not be able to move.
Alexei, please don't kill the fairies, I said. That's my cousin Claude, and I don't have much family left. Who's the other one?
The boy asked, making an incredible leap to pull at Claude's hair and vault the other fairy, whose sword was not quick enough this time.
I have no idea,
I said. I started to add that he was no friend of mine and was probably an enemy, since I figured he was the one who'd been colluding with Basim, but I didn't want to see anyone else die, except possibly Appius Livius.
I am Coleman, the fairy bellowed. I am of the Sky Fae, and my child is dead because of you, woman.
Oh, this was the father of Claudine's baby. When Eric's arms left me, I had to struggle to stay on my feet. Alexei did one of his darting runs into the circle of blades, punching Coleman's leg so hard that the fairy almost went down. I wondered if Coleman's leg had broken. But while Alexei was close, Claude had managed to stab backward and wound Alexei in the spot right below his shoulder. It would have killed the boy if he'd been human. As it was, Alexei nearly slipped on the gravel, but managed to scrabble to his feet and keep on going. Vampire or not, the boy was tiring. I didn't dare look away to see what Eric was doing, where he was. I had an idea. Under its impetus, I ran into the house, though I couldn't run in a straight line, and I had to stop and breathe on my way up the porch steps. In a drawer in my night table was the silver chain I'd gotten so long ago when the Drainers had kidnapped Bill for his blood. I grabbed the chain, staggered back out of the house with it concealed in my hand behind my back, and edged near to the three combatants, but closest of all to the dancing, whirling Alexei. Even in that short time I'd been gone, he seemed to have gotten a little slower, but Coleman was down on one knee. I hated my plan, but this had to stop. The next time the boy came by, I was ready, with plenty of slack in the chain I was gripping with both hands. I swung my arms up, then down, the slack of the chain landing around Alexei's neck. I crossed my hands and pulled. Then Alexei was on the ground and screaming. In a shaved moment after that, Eric was there with a tree branch he'd broken off. He raised both arms and brought them down. The second after that, Alexei, Tsarevich of Russia, had gone to his final death. I panted because I was too exhausted to cry, and I sank to the ground. The two fairies gradually dropped their battle stances. Claude helped Coleman stand, and they put their hands on each other's shoulders.
Eric stood between the fairies and me, keeping a watchful eye on them. Coleman was my enemy, no doubt about that, and Eric was being cautious. I took advantage of the fact that he wasn't looking at me to pull the stake from Alexei and crawl over to the helpless Appius. He watched me coming with a smile.
I want to kill you right now, I said very quietly. I want you dead so bad.
Since you've stopped to speak to me, I know you're not going to do it.
He said that with the utmost confidence.
You won't keep Eric either.
I wanted to prove him wrong on both counts, but there'd been so much death and blood already that night. I hesitated. Then I raised the broken bit of branch. For the first time, Appius looked a little worried, or maybe he was simply resigned.
Don't,
Eric said. I might still have done it if there hadn't been pleading in his voice. You know what you could do that would actually be some help, Appius Livius? I said. There was a shout from Eric. Appius Livius's eyes flickered past me, and I felt him tell me to move. I thrust myself off to the side with every ounce of strength left in my body. The sword intended for me went right into Appius Livius, and it was a fairy blade. The Roman went into convulsions instantly as the area around the wound blackened with shocking rapidity. Coleman, who had been looking down at his accidental murder victim with shocked eyes, stiffened, and his shoulders went back. He began to topple, and I saw that there was a dagger between them. Eric shoved the quivering Coleman away.
Okella!
Eric screamed, terror in his voice. Suddenly, Appius Livius went still.
Well, all right,
I said wearily, and turned my heavy head to see who had thrown the knife. Claude was looking down at the two blades still in his hands, as if he expected to see one of them vanish. Color us puzzled. Eric seized the wounded Coleman and latched onto his neck. Fairies are incredibly attractive to vampires, their blood, that is, and Eric had a great reason to kill this fairy. He wasn't holding back at all, and it was pretty gross. The gulping, the blood running down Coleman's neck, his glazed eyes. Both of them had glazed eyes, I realized. Eric's were full of bloodlust, and Coleman's were becoming full of death. Coleman had been too weakened by his many wounds to fight Eric off. Eric was looking rosier by the second. Claude limped over to sit on the grass beside me. He put my knives carefully on the ground by me, as if I'd been badgering him for their return.
I was trying to persuade him to go home,
my cousin said.
I saw him only once or twice. He had an elaborate scheme to put you in human jail. He planned to kill you until he saw you with the child Hunter in the park. He thought of taking the child, but even in a rage, he couldn't do it.
You moved in to protect me, I said. That was amazing, from someone as selfish as Claude.
My sister loved you, Claude said. Coleman was fond of Claudine, and very proud she chose him to father her child.
I guess he was one of Niall's followers. He'd said he was one of the Sky Fairies.
Yes. Coleman means dove.
It didn't make any difference now. I was sorry for him. He had to know nothing I said would have stopped Claudine from doing what she thought was right, I said.
He knew, Claude admitted. That was why he couldn't bring himself to kill you, even before he saw the child. That's why he talked to the werewolf, concocted such an indirect scheme.
He sighed.
If Coleman had really been convinced you caused Claudine's death, nothing would have stopped him.
I would have stopped him, said a new voice, and Jason stepped out of the woods. No, it was Dermot. Okay, you threw the knife, I said. Thanks, Dermot. Are you okay?
I hope...
Dermot looked at us pleadingly.
Coleman had a spell on him, Claude observed. At least, I think so.
He said you didn't have a lot of magic, I said to Claude. He told me about the spell, as close as he could say it. I thought it must be the other fairy, Coleman, who put it on him. But since Coleman is dead, I would have thought that would break the spell.
Claude frowned. Dermot? So it wasn't Coleman who laid the spell? Dermot sank to the ground in front of us.
So much longer,
he said elliptically. I puzzled over that for a moment.
He was spelled much longer ago, I said, finally feeling a little throb of excitement. Are you saying that you were spelled months ago?
Dermot seized my hand in his left and took Claude's hand in his right. Claude said, I think he means that he's been spelled for much longer, for years. Tears rolled down Dermot's cheeks.
I bet you money that Niall did it, I said. He probably had it all worked out in his head. Dermot deserved it for, I don't know, having qualms about his fairy legacy or something.
My grandfather is very loving, but not very tolerant, Claude said.
You know how they undo spells in fairy tales? I said.
Yes, I have heard that humans tell fairy tales, Claude said. So, tell me how they say to break spells.
In the fairy tales, a kiss does it.
Easily done, Claude said, and as if we had practiced synchronized kissing, we leaned forward and kissed Dermot.
And it worked! He shuddered all over, then looked at us both, intelligence flooding his eyes. He began to weep in earnest, and after a moment, Claude got to his knees and helped Dermot up.
I'll see you in a while, he said.
Then he guided Dermot into the house. Eric and I were alone. Eric had sunk onto his haunches, a little distance from the 3 bodies in my front yard. This is positively Shakespearean, I said, looking around at the remains and the blood soaking into the ground. Alexei's corpse was already flaking away, but much more slowly than that of his ancient maker. Now that Alexei had met his final death, the pathetic bones in his grave in Russia would vanish too. Eric had cast the body of the fairy onto the gravel, where it began to turn to dust, in the way fairies did. It was quite different from vampire disintegration, but just as handy. I realized I wouldn't have 3 corpses to hide. I was so tired from the sum total of a truly horrific day that I found it the happy moment of the past few hours. Eric looked and smelled like something out of a horror movie. Our eyes met. He looked away first.
Okella taught me everything about being a vampire,
Eric said very quietly.
He taught me how to feed, how to hide, when it was safe to mingle with humans. He taught me how to make love with men, and later he freed me to make love with women. He protected me and loved me. He caused me pain for decades. He gave me life. My maker is dead.
He spoke as if he could scarcely believe it, didn't know how to feel. His eyes lingered on the crumbling mass of flakes that had been Appius Livius Okella. Yes, I said, trying not to sound happy. He is. And I didn't do it.
But you would have,
Eric said. I was thinking about it, I said. There was no point in denying it.
What were you going to ask him?
Before Coleman stabbed him? Though stabbed was hardly the right word. Transfixed was more accurate. Yes, transfixed. My brain was moving like a turtle. Well, I said, I was going to tell him I'd be glad to let him live if he'd kill Victor Madden for you. I'd startled Eric, as much as anyone as wiped out as he was could be startled.
That would have been good,
he said slowly.
That was a good idea, Sookie.
Yeah, well, not gonna happen.
You were right,
Eric said, still in that very slow voice.
This is just like the end of one of Shakespeare's plays.
We're the people left standing. Yay for us.
I'm free,
Eric said. He closed his eyes. Thanks to the last traces of the drug, I could practically watch the fairy blood zinging through his system. I could see his energy level picking up. Everything physically wrong with him had healed. And now, with the rush of Coleman's blood, he was forgetting his grief for his maker and his brother and feeling only the relief of being free of them.
I feel so good.
He actually drew a breath of the night air, still tainted with the odors of blood and death. He seemed to savor the smell.
You are my dearest,
he said, his eyes manic blue. I'm glad to hear that, I said, utterly unable to smile.
I have to return to Shreveport to see about Pam, to arrange for the things I must do now that Okella is dead, Eric said. But as soon as I can, we'll be together again, and we'll make up for our lost time.
Sounds good to me, I said. We were alone in our bond once more, though it wasn't as strong as it had been because we hadn't renewed it. But I wasn't about to suggest that to Eric, not tonight. He looked up, inhaled again, and launched himself into the night sky. When all the bodies had completely disintegrated, I got to my feet and went into the house, the very flesh on my bones feeling as if it could fall off from weariness. I told myself that I should feel a certain measure of triumph. I wasn't dead, my enemies were. But in the void left by the drug, I felt only a certain grim satisfaction. I could hear my great-uncle and my cousin talking in the hall bathroom and the water running before I shut my own bathroom door. After I'd showered and was ready for bed, I opened the door to my room to find them waiting for me.
We want to climb in with you, Dermot said. We'll all sleep better.
That seemed incredibly weird and creepy to me, or maybe I only thought it should have. I was simply too tired to argue. I climbed in the bed. Claude got in on one side of me, Dermot on the other. Just when I was thinking I would never be able to sleep, that this situation was too odd and too wrong, I felt a kind of blissful relaxation roll through my body, a kind of unfamiliar comfort. I was with family. I was with blood. And I slept.